Hello,
Got
boys
it.
and girls, and welcome back to Out of This World. I'm Jamie Hanshaw, and I'm here with my Orthodox brother, Paul. And I promised you another Disney show, and here it is. We are going to talk about all things dark Disney, and we figured out that we have a lot of the same books and studies. And he sent me an email after watching the other Disney show. And it was just so intriguing. I was like, well, whatever you have to say, just come on and say it on the show because I'm sure everyone would love to hear it. Uh, I am the number one critic of Disney, if you can call it that. I've been working on this narrative for over 15 years, probably, or maybe even longer. Just the dark occult underbelly of Disney that no one wants to look at. And so, me and Paul are going to get deep into it tonight. Last time me and Kristen talked about a book called Hollywood's Dark Prince about Walt Disney's history, his childhood, his upbringing, his character, and all of those things. And tonight we're going to talk all about the Disney Corporation because it is the world's largest multimedia conglomerate with everything that you could ever want. Disney can supply you in your life with entertainment, cruises. In your email, you even said that it is a rival cult to Western Christianity,
Yeah.
right?
That's right. Well, you want to talk dark. I say we like just go all the way. Let's just go for it. We'll
Let's
call it
do
a
it.
religion.
Yeah,
We'll call
I'm
it a
here.
religion. And then we can be more open about what it really is.
Okay.
But to say that, is there any more you want to say? Go on.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so are you familiar at all with Jungian psychology, Carl Jung and any of that?
Yes,
Okay, so
because in magic they talk a lot about the dark side and integrating your female and
shadow.
your male and your alchemy. Yes, so I'm familiar
Yeah,
with
yeah,
it.
yeah. So actually, I should say, because I know that we have people watching, I do not condone any of the things I want to talk about tonight when it comes to esoterica, Disney, and like if I tell you, because you said you got some questions, I have my narrative, like my sort of story, especially coming how I got to orthodoxy, kind of just swimming through the spiritual morass and then somehow eventually like coming to heads with like even Disney throughout my whole weird spiritual quest, which we could get into. But yeah, so I may talk with, enthusiasm, excitement about a lot of this stuff, but I really do not condone any of it. For
Okay.
the record, people just get to the church as soon as possible. That's
Oh,
all I
yes. And I'm wearing the
podcast
mouse
over.
ears, as a symbol, as a prop, as an entertainment, but also as a commentary on how we have all been under this spell, especially our generation. Um, we are lab rats. We are mice to be experimented on. And I think that is what they are putting on us when they have us put on these mouse ears. And we'll get deeper into like science experiments and stuff that
And I
involve
never even thought about that. Never even thought about that,
it
but that's
makes sense,
brilliant.
right?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
So we
That's
are
cool.
the grand experiment. We are the mice that, you know, are in the maze of culture and this world that they have created using their imagineering, they call it.
I know. Isn't that weird that even like so part of my interest and please help me, Jamie, here if we get going in too many places at once. But definitely with technology and how I love that even the word imagineering is like this weird fusion of engineering with fantasy, in the
Mm-hmm.
way they're sort of like fusing the imaginative and the fantastic and the elastic and the kind of intangible dream world with nuts and bolts and machines, and how even like all of their weird audio animatronics there, it's like you peel back the veneer and it's all these like robo
Yeah.
mechanical hardware industrialized stuff. It's like Disney. I think what's so interesting about Disney is the way it's sort of this weird amalgamation of like opposites.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the thing is like, I guess maybe I should say for context, like when I was really interested in Disney, a lot of it was through that sort of Jungian lens and that alchemical idea of like fusing the opposites,
Mm-hmm.
which things that now as Orthodox I find is like this really poor like dialectical kind of way of synthesizing this and this and and it's this weird sort of pseudo. I don't want to get too like I know what I'm talking about, but it's this weird trinity. It's like this
Okay.
weird like three-part thing where it's like thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And
Right.
so much in that Jungian alchemical stuff is like finding the opposites and bringing them together.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of that in Disneyland with its sort of weird fusion of nostalgia on one hand and sort of like, you're so wonderful and come make your dreams come true, coupled with like total tyrannical control over the environment. And
Well,
so
that's
you're gonna say
interesting
something?
that you
Yeah,
said that because just thinking about Disneyland, you've got your like Main Street, which is a sort of preserved American Main Street from 1900, right?
right.
And then just a few blocks away, you have Tomorrowland, which is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the future and all about like creating new possibilities. So you have like the static part and then like the history and then the future. And that is kind of the story of the big geodesic ball in Epcot Center. Have you ridden that
Yeah.
ride?
No, so for the record, I've not been to Disney World. I've only been to Disneyland. I
Okay.
grew up in Southern California and kind of did the whole like go to Disneyland every year
Uh-huh.
and kind of deal. So I've never been to Walt Disney World.
Okay. So I have these cards that I've like condensed all of this stuff on that I want
Okay.
to interject as we talk.
Yeah, lead
So
us through. Yeah.
you mentioned Disneyland and the synthesis, the alchemical process. Um, and this isn't just like gobbledygook that we're making up because Walt Disney worked very closely with SRI Institute, the Stanford Research Institute, which
Hmm.
does a lot of things in like woo woo, parapsychology, mind control, um, ether, like ley lines. Okay, so they consulted with SRI and all branches of the military, the Office of Naval Research, DARPA, to determine the best location of the park um, with their studies of like energetic earth ley lines.
Yeah, yeah. I think I heard you guys talking about a little about that before. That's so crazy, man. Because like I knew that when he was making Disney World, he went under secret name and stuff like that, so that
Well,
nobody
this
knew
is
his behind.
this is Disneyland.
Oh,
And
oh,
then
okay,
so in
okay, okay.
California and Disney World in Florida has an even like weirder history with their
Oh,
connections with the CIA.
okay. I don't know that, but
Yeah.
I would say just intuitively when you're talking, it got me thinking about how even there, like the whole thing is that Disneyland is like kind of right on this unincorporated land or something where they even have like all of their own jurisdiction essentially.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that stuff's always pretty far out to me.
Yeah. So people from SRI left there to go become engineers at Disneyland and they start getting sponsors like Monsanto,
Hmm. Hmm.
all the big like fruit companies, Chiquita. Um, so when you go to the park, this is a big advertisement for military industrial corporations,
Right.
right? Because
Yeah,
all
it's funny. I like the Monsanto house of the future. Like back in the 60s, it was like that all plastic house that everyone's like, you would love to live in here.
oh
You
yeah,
know?
like the Jetsons, don't you want to big live in a big plastic bubble and have a
Totally.
separate like refrigerator for your irradiated foods? Or you could just irradiate them right in your kitchen, like all of these like Cold War technologies, nuclear technologies they're trying out in Disneyland.
Well, I
Um,
admit what got me and probably still gets me a little bit is the aesthetic of retrofuturism. I just love it so much. It's like
yeah,
that's what's so tough about Disney. It's like, man, that stuff looks so cool. Like you look at all that concept art and stuff from the 50s, and you're just like, see, because I'm an artist. I mean, not by like trade or anything, but I just, I like to draw and paint. I do professional musician by study.
mm-hmm.
And so just like, good art when you see it. And it's like, that's the thing is like Disney as a studio had such incredible artists that
Yes,
it makes it so hard to like like that stuff when you're also like, oh, I can't really support a lot of its deeper mechanics, and yet the
Well,
art is so gorgeous.
I don't know if you noticed, but the aesthetic of my channel is that like atomic age,
I have noticed that. Yeah.
bougie 1950s art. So
Yeah,
I
there's
do like that.
there's this I guess I'm doing a shout out, but there's this YouTube channel called Pics and Portraits,
Hmm.
PICS, and the guy does all these like retro future compilation videos. They're called like Sleepcore, and
Hmm.
they're just like all these old archival videos from like the 40s through 60s. If you like that stuff, you'd love to check it out. It's
Oh,
great.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So back to Disneyland, they figured out that the best place to put it was on latitude 33, which is also famous for some other weird events like Roswell and the Kennedy assassination.
Not to
Um,
mention like Masonic overtones, you could say
oh
pattern
yeah,
recognition 33 and Club 33, right? At
yes.
Disneyland. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you got Club 33. You've got Roy as a Mason. You've got Walt as Demolay, or actually one of the first Demolay that there
That's
were.
funny. When I was doing my research for this, I came across that second time around and I was like, it's funny. I won't be able to find the page right off the top of my head, but I remember in that book, Walt was basically saying it was like that was what made him believe in like a higher power, like
Mhm.
capital H, capital B, no
Mhm.
God, but like sort of that whole I don't know
That's
whether you
what
want to call it. Good.
you have to profess when you are Freemason. You don't necessarily have to believe in like Yahweh or Allah or whatever, but you just have to believe that there is a higher power, which they call the Grand Architect. Right?
Yeah, and see that's another thing. Disney is quite the architect, is he not?
Oh yeah, and like there you're back to Imagineering. So you're engineering from your imagination, and like if you study magic, uh, they'll tell you that everything that exists in the world first started as something in your imagination, and the process of bringing that out, something from your imagination making a material, is a magical act according to magic textbooks,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
willing.
how does this fit into Jungian psychology?
Okay, so in Jungian psychology, there's this big thing that Jung had called individuation,
Mm-hmm.
which I think as an Orthodox Christian, we would say it's a weird sort of anti-theosis. I think to give Jung his credit, he had a lot of good stuff to do as a psychologist. And personally speaking, I think it'd be really interesting to sort of like Christianize Jungian psychology,
Mm-hmm.
separate the wheat from the chaff. But as soon as he starts talking about God and Jesus, it's just like completely just throw it away, man. It's like total heresy. But all that being said, so meaning what I'm trying to say is I see in Jung a lot of seeds of things that could be orthodox, but because I believe that nobody in the West really knew about orthodoxy writ large,
Mm-hmm.
there's always this sort of compensation to where orthodoxy could fill it. It's always like some other thing that needs to take the place of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so in Jung's case, without getting too far afield on that kind of stuff, individuation is the idea that we're all sort of born in the unconscious, the sort of Freudian idea that like you're just kind of one with your mother's womb. And then as you grow, you sort of develop your individual personality.
Mm-hmm.
Jung kind of says that we're always tethered to the unconscious and that basically we are like part conscious, part unconscious. And it's sort of man's task. It's a very Gnostic thing, in my opinion, where man's task is to sort of go into the unconscious and retrieve what's been repressed or not even repressed. Like it's like, oh, trauma, I got to get rid of it, but just things you don't know about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's say
Your
me as an
shadow
artist.
side, is that what it would be?
Yeah, yeah. It's like this is insane with like the contrasexual thing. So inside me is a Disney princess, according to Jung,
Uh-huh.
that's just dying to get out, and be out of
Yeah.
her castle walls, that kind of deal. But um, so digging into your unconscious, you're sort of supposed to like, it's not stuff that's just repressed. So like, let's say because I'm like an artist, I'm not much of a football player.
Mm-hmm.
So inside of me is this athletic shadow, a part of me that maybe wants to get messy and throw the ball and have fun with my bros and all that kind of stuff, that when I'm this more individual hermetic artist, I don't have
Mm-hmm.
at my disposal of conscious tools. So much of Jungian work is to sort of like, yeah, clear out your not clear out the unconscious, but go in there and sort of retrieve things that were buried in there.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Is it,
Jung, one last,
I have
go
a
ahead.
question. Is your
Yeah.
shadow self like the opposite of what you present as? Or
Um,
because me and Rachel did a show about this book by Anton LaVey, and he was talking about like seduction and stuff and like how to um manipulate people. And he's talking about like if you can find their inner core, which is the opposite of their outer whatever, and relate to that, then you've got them. Or is
yeah,
that
I mean, on some level, Jung would say that like everything in the unconscious is shadow. Because if you
mm-hmm,
don't know it, it's in the dark,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
But in terms of like, this is stuff where, again, honestly, like everybody just go orthodox, forget all this stuff. But
Well,
since
this
we're
is
here,
why, like
since we're
people like Jordan Peterson, I think, he's
yeah.
very heavily into Jungian
But the thing
psychology,
is,
and he's
sorry to
close.
interrupt.
No,
Go ahead.
he's just close to orthodoxy, like not there yet, but
Yeah, that's the weird part though. And I guess something that like maybe tonight's not the night to go all into it. Maybe it's something, if God willing, I would ever make my own channel or anything. But when I was more interested in Jung, I still thought Peterson didn't get a lot of Jungian psychology. It was as if like he read the back cover of a lot of Jungian books and was like, oh, okay, that makes sense, because I found that when I was like deep into it, and I was close to even going to become an analyst, that like I was like, man, he's really, he's not getting it kind of deal. When that's the thing, is it skirts up so close to stuff like orthodoxy.
mm-hmm,
And I guess like getting into Jung, and what I kind of maybe what I want to talk about with Disney, and forgive me, but it might require kind of laying some ground, so you can see from my perspective, because I don't really have the conspiracy angle stuff for me, which I think honestly it complements everything where I've come out from these years. So when I reached out to you, I was like, man, like the conspiracy theory side, to say it more orthodox, it's like that's the principalities and powers that are controlling people, and their influence. I mean, do you agree? Or
oh yeah, I mean,
yeah,
ever
okay.
since I kind of like became aware of all this stuff, I've been trying to tell people like this is literally a spell that they are casting on you, and you are the victim of black magic. And Disney is innocent. It's just whatever. And I'm like, no. And so I had to like sit down and literally write a book to describe what I'm talking about, that you are all under this spell. And then like maybe last year somebody came out and they called it mass formation psychosis. You remember that?
Yeah,
That guy
yeah,
was
it's
on
funny.
Joe Rogan. He was talking about it in relation to the Koof stuff.
So in Jungian psychology, that would be called the collective, like the collective psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And so in many ways, like in Jung's concept of a person, or at least the psyche, which I think there's a lot there that can be worked with and a lot that kind of needs to go. But one of Jung's, I think, pretty interesting observations was that like just like how the human anatomy, it's like you and I look different on our face, but we all share the same anatomical features.
Mm-hmm.
We all have livers in the same places. We all have eyeballs in the same places. Same too for our psyches. They're not that different.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jung had the idea of the collective unconscious. And so that's the idea that in every culture, it seems that people, they get so into, they're like, dude, did you see that like the Aboriginals have the same myth as like the Aztecs? And it's like, what does that all mean? And so when I was more into trying to do like psychology and that kind of like soft science stuff, I was like, well, it's the collective unconscious. Like that answers so many things that you don't
Mm-hmm.
really need to like jump into speculating about ancient aliens or anything like that. It's just like, well, in the same way that we all have stomachs and we all grow hair, the same way we all want God, the same way we all have sort of this soul inside of us that yearns for the other with a capital O. We all have parts of our, et cetera, et cetera. So the collective unconscious is important because that's sort of where the world of archetypes exists.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like it's so funny because what I'm really curious about and would like to get interested in, and honestly, if there's any priests out there listening, this boy needs help and guidance, so please reach out. But meaning like there's so many things that in the world of psychology when it comes to archetypes and all that stuff, I really wonder from an Orthodox perspective if that's just like demons, and false
Mm-hmm.
gods and all these things that we don't really want any business with.
Mm-hmm.
And yet at the same time, like how the psyche of the West or in the East became Christian 2000 years ago and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
The same sort of true for our collective unconscious. Inside everybody's collective unconscious, it's as if we're living in times, pagan, Christian, Renaissance. And so that's why in many ways a lot of people are operating at different levels. And it seems like some people are back in the medieval ages, some people are, 200 years behind and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of deal. So the idea is that in the collective unconscious are all these archetypes, and different archetypes are active in different types of people. But the interesting part is that when the archetype is activated, let's say love is active, I fall in love with a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, depending on how this is where it gets a little Freudian and reductive, but let's say depending on how I grew up with my mother, when that charge and that archetype comes out of the unconscious and bubbles up in me and I fall in love with this woman, a lot of it will be affected by how I grew up, how my mother showed me love, how I understand how to relate to women, all that kind of very basic psychology stuff.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, the archetype breaks into our complexes and it enters into our personal unconscious. If you imagine you have like your base layer, collective unconscious, the archetypal psyche, the sort of objective anatomy that we all share.
Mm-hmm.
The next layer up would be sort of like our flesh. It's different among every people. And yet, so that'd be like your personal unconscious. There's a long way of saying, to bring it back to Disney, is that like I believe, just personally from my story, it's so weird, but it's true, is like a lot of these sort of deeper archetypal urges in me that are becoming activated over the years, digging into my shadow and the sort of God image in me, they call it. I found that when that was beginning to percolate up, eventually it started coming through like the images of Disney and secular pop culture and realizing that it's like um symbols sort of go through permeations and variations over time in the same way that like trees or flowers or anything do. And so I was just so interested in, it's like, what is the symbol of Mickey Mouse? Like seriously, in the context of like Buddha and the yin yang and the cross, like what are these three circles? Like how will people 400 years look back on our time and analyze these symbols? And so I know I'm getting a little afield here, but yeah, I'm trying to get to the point that like from the deeper archetypal bones of whatever it is these sort of numinous energies are,
Mm-hmm.
at some point or other they percolate through and become the Mickey Mouse symbol. And
Right.
in in his unconscious, he produced this mouse at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always been sort of interested in getting underneath the veneer, sort of peeling back the audio animatronic skin and looking at the nuts and bolts underneath. And so like when I was getting interested in Disney, I was really trying to look at it from this angle of like thousands and thousands of years of human symbols,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of being like, well, we're at this point now. So
Well, let's take an example and deconstruct it real fast. The
yeah, yeah.
princess archetype, because that is something that became super popular by design in 2000. So before that, you had, your classical Disney princesses, but their catalog was a lot more about nature and animals, and you might have a princess movie every couple of years, but then starting in 2000 they just really hit it hard with the princess programming, I called it. And
Right.
so do you think that I'm onto something in a Jungian psychology way, like them taking the princess archetype is something that every girl like wants to emulate, but then once you get them to identify as this thing, then they get to tell you what that entails. So like now that you're a princess, you need a wand and you need a perfume and you need some
Mhm.
high heels and you need a sparkle dress and you need like all of these things that a magician would use in a ritual, honestly.
True, true.
And because it's a self-transformative psychodrama, and then they also get to tell you like how a princess acts. And what I saw in the popular culture in from the 2000s onward was just like this total materialistic pink princess, vapid, spoiled. um
I mean, it's so weird to think how far we are from the beginning of Hannah Montana. Like to think that, it's like that's 20 years went so quickly, but like when you say it like that, I think like, yeah, you're totally right. Like I remember just being so inundated with that stuff like constantly.
yeah.
But I
Mhm.
I think there's even like so getting back to again, I hate giving so much credit to you, and we could say almost like the depth psychology level or the psychological angle or whatever, but like I think there's a deeper, seriously, like a Gnostic implication with way more of that kind of stuff. Where, meaning, I think you're right in that, like the programming is on this level, and if we were to go deeper, I think it's this sort of Gnostic idea that, like, whether it's men or women, it's like you are trapped, you are this special light in the midst of darkness, and it's your uh, obligation and duty and heroine journey to come through all that darkness and shine light into the world. And
Mhm.
so whether it's like the princess who needs to be rescued by her prince, or the princess who's, I don't know, maybe in the newer movies out on the adventures kind of deal, more there's still this idea that the feminine, to me, like in so much of Disney, is like in a lot of just pop culture, Hollywood writ large, like I think Gnosticism is seriously like the big myth of the last like 100 years
Mm.
plus. I almost think like everything is basically Gnostic to the point where it's like, is it really everything Gnostic? And it's like,
Well, that's funny
maybe
because
actually.
when Jay and I do movie analyses, it's almost funny because we're like, is this Gnostic? Yes. Like every Hollywood movie almost it that has like a higher message in it is a like a Gnostic narrative.
Yeah, I believe truly, like, and it's like, um yeah, I don't know, I'm feeling we go over this if you want to
Well,
go.
let me finish my thought about the princesses
Yeah,
because
please.
back then I wasn't Orthodox, so I wasn't thinking about it with this mindset. I was thinking about it in like bloodline families and especially royalty have some dark histories and don't have very good reputations. And here in America I feel like the royalty programming was so heavy, and like watch William and Kate's wedding, watch Harry and Meghan's wedding, get wrapped up in this like royalty stuff. um and I didn't and I still don't think that that's very good for
Mm.
culture. But then I kind of changed a little bit when I became Orthodox because I was looking at it in this way, like, well, we are princess and prince. Like, if we're, children of God, then we're like cosmic royalty. So we should act
When
like
you get
that.
married too as an Orthodox, you dress up like a king and
Oh,
queen.
exactly. You're
Yeah.
crowned king and queen of your own home. And so this is something to be emulating in a good way. And that's what I learned about like Byzantium and Orthodox emperors and things like that.
Yeah,
Before that, like I hadn't learned one good thing about any royal family that ever did anything
I
good.
know, right? And I used to
Yeah.
hate, I know, maybe this is getting too tangential and like I'm just creating terrible sound bites for myself, but I'm starting to realize more and more like, and again, like in terms of our actual times we live in, I have no idea. Like I'm just waiting for the Lord to come and just, like beam me up already, man. But like I realize like, man, monarchy's not so bad actually. Like we start to really look at it, you're like, there's like a lot there
It
actually. That's like,
sounds crazy because like growing up in America, the royals are the ones that like take everything and they tax you, and
right.
that's
Okay, so this
something
is
that
really good actually. This is bringing up stuff that might be able to thread some of these because I realize on some level by us not, which is totally fine, not really having a shared Jungian language, I'm assuming too many things. So much of what Jung's big idea is, and maybe I should be clear too for people listening, like I actually think let's pretend Jamie, you and I, it's like we're in our Orthodox kingdom
Mm-hmm.
And we can like go to the drawbridge and maybe step out for a bit, and we're like maybe outside the castle walls, but we're still in our larger kingdom. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe we'll traverse a little of the dark forest, and if it gets too weird, we're gonna run right back over, or maybe we're sitting on the castle walls and we're like, oh, look at that's interesting out there in Western culture. That's interesting. But meaning, I think a lot of what we're talking to about tonight, and honestly, like everything in our fallen world is exactly that, fallen.
Mm-hmm.
And we could talk about this stuff all day long, but at the end of the day, we know there's like a sharp divide between orthodoxy and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So on some, at least that's what I believe. And so on some level, we could talk about this stuff all day, but I'm also very willing to just like sever it all in a second and be like, I don't know, this is all just skepticism. Like, it's not the truth. Like, let's just let it go. But all that being said, I wanted to preface that by saying like a lot of what Jung is talking about, maybe what we're going to talk about, is the idea of what's going on in the Western psyche.
Okay.
Meaning that like I don't want to do all this crazy pattern recognition and talk about patterns and symbols and then give the false impression that these have to do with orthodoxy at all. Like they only do in the sense that this is kind of what we're up against, you could say, or things that are rubbing, maybe not fighting up against, but sort of interfacing with our world.
Yeah. So
That
it's
we
just Orthodox adjacent. It's not really.
yeah. And we're not trying to necessarily like, hey, if we could Christianize these things, great. But if not, let's just let them go. All
Okay.
that being said, like, I just want to give like uber preface that talking about the Western fallen world here, and
Uh-huh.
who knows what hope there is for any of this stuff, really. But and really, if anyone's like, you guys sound crazy, I'm like, yeah, I know, I'll let it go. I'll just go to church instead and let this all go. So all that being said, in Jung's idea is that in the Western psyche, he has what's called the God image.
Mhm.
So just like in all of us, there's the image of the father or your mother or your lover and your brother and all that kind of stuff. There's the archetypal archetype of God.
Mhm.
And Jung being a distinguished 19th century biased academic, he won't ever dare talk about God, but he'll talk about the image of God.
Mhm.
You get what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
okay, just be really clear. So what he says is like the image of God comes in various forms depending on the culture. It
Mhm.
could be anything from Dionysus to Apollo to Christ to Odin to yeah, anyways, so many different gods. Now Jung said that in the West, which again is Orthodox, I don't necessarily agree with this, but like in the Western psyche, Western Christianity, the God image was too light, too positive, too happy hippie Jesus, like to the point where things like the feminine, nature, and a darker level sort of sexuality or anything sort of earthy and chthonic and dark got just totally omitted from Western religion.
Mhm.
So Jung sort of posited that that stuff went into the collective unconscious, where the consciousness of the culture was too one-sided. If you imagine a yin yang, it was all light side, no dark. So Jung sort of had the idea that the other half of the Western psyche was always in the collective unconscious and would percolate through things like art, or in the Middle Ages it'd be like alchemy. And
Mhm.
so you got really big on alchemy because you saw, oh, alchemy is the completion of the God image. And so in many ways, getting back to your princess stuff, it's sort of like quote unquote given in Jungian psychology that we're looking for our king, we're looking for our queen, we're
Mhm.
waiting the return of the king, so to speak,
Mhm.
and that most every movie, everything since like the year zero is about man trying to find God, or God coming back to man, or looking for the savior, or
Mhm.
something like anything searching for the grail. And so I think just in a way, in the collective unconscious of the Western man is this sort of hole that's looking for God.
Mhm.
And so in many ways, I think what I was wanting to talk about tonight is how I see Disney as this sort of vacuum that honestly fills that for a lot of people. And it could be Disney specific, but Disney could also be a sort of larger symbol for like sort of secular Hollywood pop culture entertainmentism.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
because think about it, it's like in our world these days, it's like choose your corporate overlord.
Right.
Netflix, Apple,
Hulu.
Google, Disney. It's like I'll pick Disney, man. Like they got, if I'm gonna choose like my tyrant, like I'll take them over Netflix any day, like
Yeah.
tongue in cheek, of course. Um, so sorry, that's again a long way of saying, but I think like so much of what I was when I was getting interested in Jung and Disney was this idea that, again, I say it now, like I was just so like spellbound, like you were saying at the time, that like I've woken up from that stuff and just like, oh my God, like so crazy. But like Western man is looking for God. And
Mhm.
so it's like I then sort of got interested in my psychological work to see where in the collective symbols that sort of energy that enthused people, that got them to believe, to inspire, to feel inspired, to have hope and happiness, all that kind of whatever sort of stuff. I was like, I see more of that going on in Disneyland than in the Protestant churches. Like, I see more, again, just from my own experience. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, you go to Disneyland and it's like everybody there's happy.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, is this what it takes for people to be happy in our world? Like, shell over thousands of dollars to like go in this miniature plastic controlled environment, to buy this stuff and go on these plastic rides. It's like, poor Christianity. Like, it can't compete with this.
Oh
Like,
no.
really, you
Yeah.
know?
People would much rather go to Disneyland, I think, than a Protestant church.
Right. And that was my
Um,
thing, is like, oh, go ahead.
what do you think about Walt as an archetype when they call him Uncle Walt?
Yeah, that one's interesting. So, another thing that, like, man, this is inspiring me. I'd be like, I should probably just do like a Jungian analysis on Walt Disney, break it down. But like, um, Uncle Walt is like his persona. So
Mm-hmm.
in Jungian psychology, you have ego in Jung's work is like a neutral word, where ego is just sort of the center from which we orient to the world. And our ego can face outwards and inwards. When the ego faces outwards, and like you and I are talking right now, we just met tonight, we want to be as transparent with each other as possible, but there is this level where we are engaging as personas with one another. Do you follow me? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're putting on a little bit of our mask. So on that level, Uncle Walt was the mask that he wore. And it's like he became the, and I don't mean this in a liturgical sense, the icon of himself in many
Yeah.
ways, and I think I should have done more research for tonight anyways to pull up the quotes right away. But like there are so many times where he's like, I'm not this person. He's like,
Yes,
I smoke cigarettes. Walt Disney doesn't smoke cigarettes. I
exactly.
drink. Walt Disney doesn't drink. And you get to see this man who's just so torn inside. Like I gotta be honest too, like I'm a man of the heart. Like I feel so, like, as much as I feel our world's possessed by demons, I also wonder if there's a chance for us, if like, meaning like I see Walt Disney's story and it's like, to be very honest with truth, I think you guys are right with the conspiracy stuff. I have no doubts about that.
Uh-huh.
I just think Walt was a little perhaps more naive and innocently involved in these things than he thought. Like I often wish I had like the Christmas Carol story of like Walt going back and seeing what became of his legacy, and
Mm-hmm.
wondering like if he ever knew this is what it would become, if he ever would have started, it's just like it's so mind blowing to me
Well,
the way. Go ahead.
it's my and what? Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Actually, that's probably a good thought to finish. It's so mind blowing to me the way we can affect the world, frankly.
Yeah.
Like one little thing you do creates this ripple that creates so many effects. And it's like, when Walt Disney was a little boy, he wasn't a CIA operative. He was just a little guy in Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
whose dad was like a total tyrant to him and made him work all hours of the day, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just, to me, so fascinating, the things that create a person,
Mm-hmm.
especially, that Mickey was like sort of this second take, because he had the Oswald rabbit that got totally stolen from him. You know that story of like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting because I mean, who would have thought when he started this little mouse that it would become like, I mean, I think arguably like the greatest, most recognizable symbol in the world next to the cross. Like,
Probably. Yeah.
yeah.
It's like Jesus, Mickey Mouse, and Elvis.
And nice call with Elvis. I
Yeah.
wasn't ready for that one, but yeah, yeah, perhaps.
um,
Let's see. Who would number four be? Anyways, go on. Go on.
well, let's talk about his character for a second because,
Sure.
um, like you said, he was very overworked and abused as a child. He looked up to his
Right.
brother more than his dad because his dad was, like you said, a tyrant, um, philanderer, gambler, cheater, and this, and I think in his core, he just wanted to be like a wholesome American cartoonist, and that's where he got the desire to have like Main Street crystallized like it was when he was a boy from Missouri. He wanted to join the army in World War I, and
Yeah, he enrolled early. Yeah, I know that story.
yeah, so he
Yeah.
had to, fudge his birth certificate to do that.
Yeah, it's like he's been a phony ever since he started, you know? And
Well,
sorry, I don't mean that judgmentally. I don't mean that judgmentally, just sort of like
it's true though, like
observing
when you
patterns.
compile all of these things, you're like, well, this person doesn't really have a problem with acting, presenting one way to the world and being another way in private.
Mm. He was a showman too. A lot of stories, I can't remember them verbatim, but when he was a kid, he was very theatrical and
Mm-hmm.
always took roles in plays and things like that.
Well, they said that during his time in the Red Cross over there, he would make fake battle relics and sell them.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. And he'd like put fake bullet holes in there and sell them and
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, yeah.
So then he was used in the 30s by the B'nai B'rith to like put a wholesome veneer on Hollywood. Like, have you seen Babylon? Movie Babylon?
You know, it's so funny. I wanted to go see that, but it was like out the minute I went
Oh,
to go, like the day I went to the theater and I saw you and Jay had a stream and I was like, oh, maybe I should watch Babylon. Like I went and it was out. So I'm like waiting for it to come to on demand, like when
okay.
it happened. So don't spoil
So
it for
this
me.
is the time period right before Walt Disney would become
Right.
famous. So like the debauchery and the what Kenneth Anger would write about in his Hollywood Babylon books, and like the very Wild West beginning of the industry. It was associated with Babylon because it was so surly, and
Right. And
the
Walt was kind of like seen as this more pure, not involved in that kind of stuff. And also, nothing, this will sound scandalous if it's taken out of context. He was one of the, not like the only Jew out there, too.
yes,
And that
that's
was
why
like,
they chose him. Exactly. So, yeah, he was like to bring the family values back to Hollywood and deflect the scandals. And so that's why Disney Studios was so strict back in the day, because they wanted that image of like, we don't have facial hair and we don't have like,
and only Walt can have a mustache.
right. So then you have this issue of his true parentage, which is so weird. Nobody
Yeah.
still,
Sorry to cut you off. I heard about this through you. Listen to your other chat. I didn't know anything about that. I was like, man, like,
yeah, like you
he
think
does look a
Obama birth
little, he does.
certificate was confusing. Like I've read so many books about him and they still don't know, if he was legitimate or not. So this is the thing that they would use to get him to work with the government, the CIA,
Hmm.
the FBI.
Like what? They blackmailed him or something?
No, well, at first they were like, we'll help you find your true parentage if you do.
Uh,
Like, I mean, have you um you've heard that like the Disney studio lot was taken over the day after Pearl Harbor,
oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
right? And they were
And they
like,
and they said again, like not my bag, but that because it's so close to Lockheed and Air Force bases over there, they're like, well, in the event that Japan is to bomb us now in Los Angeles, we got to take over the Disney studios to make
yeah.
sure we're here and ready.
And
And
so here,
that's when
go ahead.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just saying this. Here comes all of these propaganda films.
Yeah, the 40s. And it's like, so on some level, I think we should have fun, maybe almost dialoguing. Like, I'll take maybe the side of like, oh, poor innocent Walt, totally victimized, duped by all this, and you could tell me more of the other stuff because from the sort of psychology angle, which again, I take no real merit in this. Who knows? Just we're just having fun probing here. I saw that period as like poor Walt. This dude like just wanted to do art. He wanted to innovate. He wanted to make cartoons, and here he's just like forced to like do these stupid propaganda videos,
Mm-hmm.
on some level. But here's the thing: is once you look at pictures of him from like right before then to after, he like ages overnight.
Mm-hmm.
It's like completely almost changes with that whole wartime situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so interesting how much that sort of left this effect on him. And that's when his workers striked
Went on
on him,
strike.
went on strike. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because, like, I guess maybe to kind of get back to the psychology thing, which honestly I should, if we maybe find a place here, maybe I can tell you more about like my story, quote unquote, so this could have some context. But like, so much in psychology of depth psychology of Jung is that like whatever we do not consciously try to strive to make a part of ourselves will be projected onto the outer world. Classic example: lefties hate righties, righties hate lefties, and you can't see how like inside of you is the opposite,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's all about this idea of finding wholeness, which we as Orthodox Christians totally believe that. Like, wholeness is so important. You don't want to be fragmented and divided. So on that level, I'm always trying to observe where is wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
So in a guy like Disney, it's like, where is his otherness? And for him, so much of it is projected outwards onto his workers, onto his art, onto his park, onto his studio, all these things that, like, from the point of view of a spiritual person, he had nothing. Like, he was so empty. I mean, my personal opinion, so much of it was just projected into stuff.
Oh yeah.
It's like, and so on that level, getting back to the strike and those years with the war, it was as if Disney's unconscious that he was so able to control and order and make these cartoons, turn them in my office, do this. He's the master architect ego who's in control of everything. Here's this point where it totally revolts on him. It's as if he went through a psychosis experience, but instead of it being internal, it was external. And
Mm-hmm.
his whole being, all of his lower parts of himself, his workers, rebel against him, and here he is like locked up in his world, and it's like he's just so dry from ideas and stuff from like the war, going up to the House of Un-American Activities Council, the strike, all that stuff. It's so interesting because, like, again, from like the angle of depth psychology, when the ego, when our consciousness loses energy, it all goes into the unconscious. And often, like a plant, it will be sitting in there in darkness and growing before it can come out again.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so interesting that after those years of lull in the 40s, Disney, what does he come up with next in the 50s?
Disneyland.
Disneyland.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like such this interesting period of almost like this creative depression
Mm-hmm.
that then this comes back where there's this whole other thing where it's like, no, I will be in control. I will be in control again, But anyways, there's a lot more we could say about that. But go on. What do we got? Where do you want to go with next with all this?
Um, well, I guess we're still talking about his character and his like dark shadow side,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
So yeah, we have so much we could say. So let me look at some of my notes here.
So he was used, I mean, he was used as a tool by
Totally.
Hoover, by the FBI, by, you know, I don't know if you've seen the cartoons where they get you to pay your taxes by showing you how Minnie Mouse and them can pay their Donald Duck actually.
I know. It isn't it crazy that, like, again, I'm just like, I'm a total buffoon. I'm not super smart kind of guy, but just realizing like, man, we didn't even have income tax until like then,
Until a
It's just like,
cartoon did it.
what?
And people weren't doing it because it was unconstitutional. And they're like trying to get people to pay their taxes. They're like, no, we're not going to do that. And then here comes Donald Duck, like, I pay taxes. And suddenly, like, taxes to beat the Axis.
Go. And then I saw a lot of original propaganda art that was up there. It's pretty far. I'll text it over to you sometime.
Okay.
It's funny. Okay, go ahead. I had
No,
some
what's
stuff I
funny?
could say. Oh, well, I have this book. I was wondering if you want to hear a couple excerpts. Sergei Eisenstein, he was a Russian film director who did all these famous like Russian films, most especially Ivan the Terrible and
Mm-hmm.
Alexander Nevsky. These are these movies. He's like early 20th century, and so he met Disney like in the 20s, 30s. I'm not entirely sure, but he has some mind blowing things that he was saying about him. That I thought might be interesting. If you've never heard a couple passages, I thought I'd read to you if you wanted to hear them.
Yeah.
Would you like to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because what we're doing right now is separating the character, the archetype from the machine that
Yeah.
took over his imagination and
Right.
his
So let's,
artistic
yeah,
expression and
I
used
like
it
it. So
for,
let's,
yeah,
I'm sorry to cut you off. I get so
just
excited.
using Disney for bad things.
Yeah, so let's try to keep that for a bit. We will try to get into the, like Disney the man, and Disney the icon or the
Uh-huh.
symbol. I feel blasphemous saying that, the icon, but I think we know what we mean here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just read a couple passages and then feel free to just muse back to me what your thoughts are.
Okay.
So he says, Disney provided direct grounds and material for an analysis of the survival of animism and totemism in modern consciousness and art. The very principle of the type of cinema in which Disney worked consisted in the animation not only of animals and plants, but of the entire objective world. And so he goes on to talk about how, like in Disney, you see fire dance, and
Mm-hmm.
it's things where like the animation of matter. When we look at sort of like, and then we get a little, I can have so many tentacles in this sort of thing. But what I'm interested in is like looking at sort of fallen man's world throughout thousands of years, and like let's say looking at art history, and it's like not until animation, drawings, the last time drawings moved by light was in the caves of Lascaux.
Mm-hmm.
Like cave drawings was when the animated drawing existed. And so it's like, for me, looking at something like animation itself as an art form is so mind blowing in the history of the human race. Because like before, when I was more, I don't know, let's just say, for lack of a better word, evolutionary, I would think about, imagine if I lived 4,000 years ago and I saw an animated film today,
Mm-hmm.
what would I think? You know,
Magic.
Matt, period,
Yeah.
magic. Yeah, yeah. So all that being said, like I guess when we're talking tonight, just like I'm always amazed at Disney in the context of like, seriously, it's like since the fall,
Mm-hmm.
like imagining like this man, 10,000 years of art, of history, of politics, however you want to slice it, and it sort of comes down the mountain to this guy, and how much Disney is just, I believe, so so intertwined with the last 100 years. I mean, Americana itself is designed by Disney. Like when
Yeah.
we think of apple pie and baseball and Main Street, like that was created by Disney.
Yeah.
There was no Americana back in the day. Because if you think about it, if you were like really living in the good old 30s, it's like, how would you know what anybody was doing in New York City if you lived in Kansas?
Right.
Like, you wouldn't definitely not see it on a television right away overnight. So, anyways, let me go on with Eisenstein, then you can muse back. But I was just trying to say, it's like I'm so amazed at like the fact that, yeah, like it doesn't seem like anything to us because we grew up on cartoons, but imagine how crazy it must have been seeing an animated cartoon for the first time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's say you're born in like 1875 and you go see a Mickey Mouse in like 1930 or something. Oh, that might be a little, no, you'd be alive then. But
Steamboat Willie. Remember that?
yeah,
Yeah.
it'd probably be so mind blowing.
Yeah.
So, anyways, let me read a little more to you and then you can use back to me what you think.
Okay.
I am sometimes frightened when I watch his films, frightened because of some of the absolute perfection in what he does. This man seems to know not only the magic of every technical means, but also the most secret strands of human thought, images, ideas, feelings. Such was probably the effect of St. Francis of Assisi's sermons. He creates somewhere in the realm of the very purest and most primal depths, there where we are all children of nature. He creates on the conceptual level of man, not yet shackled by logic, reason, or experience. That is how butterflies fly. What purity and clarity of soul is needed to make such a thing? To what depths of untouched nature is it necessary to dive with bubbles and bubble like children in order to reach absolute freedom from all categories, all conventions, in order to be like children? It's like, man, this guy, he's really impassioned by Disney. I got a few more, and then I got a few more. Hey, if this doesn't draw any fruit, that's fine too. We'll just keep going. Disney is simply, quote, beyond good and evil. Like the sun, like trees, like birds, like ducks and mice, deer and pigeons that run across his screen. To an even greater degree than Chaplin. Then Chaplin, who sermonizes and often gets lost in Quakerizing. Disney's films, while not exposing sunspots, themselves act like reflections of sun rays and spots across the screen of the earth. They flash by but burn briefly and are gone. In a certain French song, a cat stole a round piece of cheese, but the obliging moon placed it on an empty dish and a little white round reflection of the lunar disk. He who takes it into his head to bite hold of Disney by the usual analysis and yardstick, the ordinary requirements, the standard norms, inquiries, and demands of high genres and art, he will gnash his teeth at empty air. And still, this is a joyful and beautiful art that sparkles with a refinement of form and dazzling purity. A little more here. As much paradox in the community of the serious arts as the unprincipled but eternal circus, as the singing of a bird, lacking any content but infinitely exciting in its warbling. Here it is like an aroma produced without a flower, a taste extracted from a fruit, sound as such, affect freed from purpose. How is this achieved? For at the center of Disney as well stands man, but man brought back, as it were, to those pre-stages that were traced out before Darwin. Like, this guy's going deep into
he really
his sort of like
respects Disney. So this
I
is
know.
what you're talking
Yeah.
about when you say Disney is a rival cult to Western Christianity.
Right. Well, I
And
could go on way more. We're just touching on that. So we could totally keep going on that. But go on.
but I'm thinking, okay, so this guy really loves Disney a lot, but Walt did not draw all of the cartoons. He didn't
Yeah,
paint
he
the
didn't do much
stuff.
of
He
anything.
did he was just like a really good, manager of
Right.
ideas.
So it's so funny because remember back in the day, so this is a thread we didn't really talk about much at all tonight, and maybe we should do a whole other thing on it, or again, maybe I should just start doing this on my own and talking to people about it. But when it this is a whole other area that I'm really interested in. And so when it comes to
Okay,
talking about
media ecology, what does that mean?
yeah, okay, so media ecology, just like ecology, we're looking at a way that our environment is balanced. And in media ecology, it's the right balance of technologies in our life.
Okay.
So let's say how much screen time to book time you're doing.
Hmm.
How are your sense ratios engage with technology, and how is technology creating a certain environment? Every technology when it's created creates certain services and disservices. A car creates obvious enhancements and obvious things that, let's say, for instance, the first person who had a car could get away from his family,
Hmm.
could leave, and totally detach yourself. Or be this new private bedroom that people would go to because the home was too enclosed. So, anyways, we could talk about technology in terms of the effects it creates.
Hmm.
And so, we man, forgive me, what was the last thread you were saying?
Just how Disney was a manager of artistic
Oh, that's
people.
right, that's right. So the idea is that the artist in media ecology, McLuhan's
Hmm.
thought is that the artist is kind of like the antenna of the human race.
Hmm.
The artist is often picking up things, signals, ideas, archetypal patterns long before the rest of the culture is aware of it. And so I believe Disney is an artist, a certain type of artist,
Hmm.
for sure, but
Hmm.
definitely one that almost in a way is very representative of the 20th century. So, like what you were saying, you know, back in the day, it used to take a village to raise a child, but in the 21st century, it takes a whole corporation to make an artist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like you're saying, Disney, he to me is a prime example. And like, look at somebody like, you know, even on another level, like a Mark Zuckerberg, a guy who we not call an artist, and yet he's clearly created a, what do you want to call it, thing, for lack of a better word, that other
Yeah.
people are a part of and manage and take care of. And even though a lot
Right.
of times in the new world we live in now, it's like a person will often be an innovator or have an idea, but they won't be the person to carry it out all the way. Or
Mm-hmm.
and in many ways, like the new environment we live in, new meaning like the last 150 years or so, ever since the dawn of electricity, people are more required to program their environments in ways that they never had to by then. In many ways, the artist, a guy like Disney, it's like, let's say this, like you guys do your shows, you have so much work you have to do. You have to become a sound engineer, you have to become a businessman, you have to not only that provide the information of your show, you have to be like promoting yourself, like all these things that back in the day, even in like in the 50s or 60s, if you were a movie star or a band, you would never have to do all this work,
Oh
you know.
yeah. It's
And
like
it's like,
those carnival guys that like have a drum set on their back and they're playing
yes,
guitar and like
Bert
there's
from
cymbals on their knees and like
we're
all
talking
of
Mary
like doing
Poppins
the
now.
whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so on some level, I think like Disney is a very interesting antenna forerunner of, I think, the future artist. Like in many ways, what we were future being us today. I
Mm-hmm.
think Disney did an analog, was a foreshadow and analog what we're doing today in digital. So for instance, Disneyland is an analog version of like a Facebook or a matrix of some kind. It's this
Yeah.
programmed environment you enter into
Mm-hmm.
where inside of it you believe you have choice. Let's ride the Matterhorn. Let's go get a turkey leg. Let's do this and that. But you have
Yeah.
no control
Yeah.
inside in there at all, you know? It's the
And
same way when you get
everything
in
is
our apps,
synthetic in there.
right? And we're like, oh, I can't wait to talk to so and so. I'm gonna like this. Oh, I have so many comments. It's like all I have to do is flip the switch and you're gone. You know, it's
Uh-huh.
like you don't, you know what I'm saying? So it's like this sort of
So
my go ahead.
yeah, so the theme park is sort of a rudimentary meta world.
Yeah.
It's just
Disneyland,
a synthetic environment, right?
absolutely. But it's one of these things that I guess like, man, can I tangent just a little bit? And I mean it's not too tangential, but I guess if I may, maybe say a little bit about my personal life. And
Okay.
if I think it might be able to create some context. Like for me, it's hard. I really want to inspire people, you know, kind of this cliche. We just want to help and be good Christians. And, you know, it's like for me, I'm all about like wanting to wake people up, you know, and it's like I hear from your guys' talks, like there's a side of it. It's like, yo, man, like Hydra is taking over you, wake
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this other side. It's like, hey, guess what? Paradise exists and it's inside of you. Wake up. Like, you don't need Disney. You don't need Star Wars. You don't need any of this crap. Like, God has provided so much for us that, like, just to breathe is like incredible, you know? Like, from because my background is like in psychedelics and all this kind of like really, yeah, like we could go down that rabbit hole too. But like, having had experiences where it's like, oh, you know, I've almost like know what it's like to be like a blade of grass. It's like, trust me, human life is incredible. Like,
Mm-hmm.
guys, it's like, let's not take any of this for granted. So, all that being said, I noticed there's this great, like, in our culture, maybe it's a little different because nostalgia is so hard these days, but like, even just a few years ago, it was kind of like, um, I would get sad because I'd see people that'd be so despondent and upset about our world, and rightly so. But it's like you don't realize how you're already engaging in these sort of spiritual liturgical practices without knowing it. If you
Mm-hmm.
only knew that every time, maybe you just go to church instead, or maybe you'd at least acknowledge that when you're going to Disneyland, there's more importance to it that you're giving to it than maybe you would have just said like, oh, we're just going to have fun,
Mm-hmm.
and so I guess like um I just see that sort of nostalgia and yearning in our culture. It just like breaks my heart, because it's like you just want people to like wake up and stop being in the plastic matrix. And yet you realize like as a Christian, on some level, the greatest thing you could do is let them stay asleep. Because what I mean is like real love is not forcing anything upon someone.
I know.
You know,
I've had to learn that the hard way.
it's
Just
so heartbreaking. Like,
in the conspiracy way, like you can't just splooge it on them all at once because then
right, right.
you can't get
That's
to the point. You have to start at the beginning where you started, and it's really hard to try and find the inroads because everybody has different ways that they come to these realizations.
yeah, and for me it's like it's funny because like I never thought when I was getting into my depth work and going all into my psyche and all this stuff that like Disney would play such like a huge effect. But it's one of these things where like in my own sort of like Gnostic, whatever, the Jungian stuff digging into my shadow, is like I was almost going through the years of my life, unpeeling all these onion layers and be like, oh yeah, that happened when I was 10 years old. And okay, I'm dealing with this now and blah, blah, blah. Eventually I'd like when I was getting deeper and deeper into my work, and a lot of it too was always guided by my dreams,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't really do dream work anymore. I think it's kind of weird occulty stuff. But like, if I had a dream about a hippo, it's like I'm going to study hippos this week, and just following that thread of the unconscious wherever it went.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to get to this point where I started dreaming about like Disneyland and Jesus, like not together necessarily, but like kind of throughout the months. And I was like, oh no, like I guess I'm going to start getting into these. And I started having to like be really honest with myself that growing up in a sort of church family, I mean, I stopped going to church probably when I was like 10, 11, 12. Like I was pretty checked out, like really early. But just noticing that's like, on one hand, we have this like God, God, God stuff. But it's like my family's more interested in watching TV. And
Mm-hmm.
like we're more of like a pagan pop culture family than we are Christian.
Well, what's interesting is like even Christian families that try to limit their children's exposure to things will still let Disney through carte blanche just because
Yes,
they have
thank
that
you. This
seal
is
of approval.
perfect tie-in, perfect tie-in. So this is one of these things I then had to realize with myself, like, digging through my own sort of, I kind of imagine that like at birth we were given this golden cup to just drink from life, just enjoy everything of life. And at some point we like cut the bottom off or something happens. And then we're just going through trying to drink everything from life and nothing is getting through to us. Or we throw this cup away in our youth and then we like go through our therapy to try to find that bottom half so that we can again live.
Mm-hmm.
And I defined at a certain point about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when I was digging in, it's like, man, I get to this point where it's like, I grew up on animation. I grew up on Disney cartoons, like you're saying. And it's like, I just had to be really honest with myself that I found more enjoyment watching Pinocchio than going to church, period. Like, no question about it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that as a kid, when you go to Disneyland, a deal that we would rather just poop all over it.
Yeah. Okay. So this made me think of one thing. You said you heard of Project MK Ultra and Project Monarch.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That I know. Yeah.
So this is what I was writing about in my second book about how when you see these movies, they purposely put in traumatic scenes to put an emotional anchor in you as a child.
Mm.
And I talk about like Land Before Time is the first movie I ever saw.
That traumatized you?
Yeah.
Or first movie you ever saw?
No, yeah, both.
Oh, hey, you know what? I don't want to forget. I had some questions I wanted to ask you, Disney related. Maybe at the end we can
Okay.
we can
Oh,
fill them
yeah,
down.
yeah. That's a good
Fun.
idea.
Okay, well, go on though. Go on
But
though.
so I have all these examples of Disney movies. in particular, like, no, I know Land Before Time is Spielberg, but like Finding Nemo, Dumbo, Simba, Bambi, Lilo and Stitch, Old Yeller,
Lion King.
Lion, yeah, Simba. And so you're right. I think that these movies are creating fractures in your psyche as a child that have to be healed or integrated later on, um, by whatever means that is. If it's just still being like a fan of Disney and going to Disney. Like I say this example all the time, but like when I saw Land Before Time and his mom died, I had to go buy the plush animal because I had to
Hmm.
adopt him.
Wow.
And
What an interesting, you think that's a motherly instinct in you,
I
like
was
as a
aware of
girl?
this as a child. Like this thing needs me to take care of it now because it is an orphan.
Wow.
Um, so
For
just think about
me,
the
go
implications
ahead.
of that selling merchandise when you.
So that's one of these other things that like, man, I have so many angles. Like I almost wonder if we should have a discussion of like very pinpoint headings for all these Disney things. It could be a vector for everything. But like that's the other thing is when you look at the massive level of the human race,
Mhm,
fallen man,
mhm,
merchandise, like that didn't even occur until the 20th century. It's
mhm.
like something like merchandise itself, like when I was watching this Disney documentary and you realize like all these plush dolls that were being sold, I was like, there was no such thing as plush dolls until like the 20th century. Like I'm sure people had their teddy bears, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
this
like
mass
Cornhusk
idea.
doll or something, or dollies
Yeah,
or
just the
something.
idea of the corporate, and I don't mean that in a necessarily evil way necessarily, but just the mass industrial way of like churning out plush dolls based off a 2D mouse drawing that some dude made up. It's like when you think about this, like imagine in the 1500s, like what would have been the equivalent of this?
Well, gods and goddesses, like, stone idols, you trade
Right.
those, or you put those in your kid's crib, or, like you
Well,
have
and
your
that's one of
altar
these
to them.
that's one of these things where like when it comes to idolatry and iconography or the icon versus the idol,
Hmm.
it's so interesting because that's like one of these other things I think Disney is a great example of, because like in Orthodox theology, an icon is basically, a representation. It's a visible representation of something that's visible and invisible.
Hmm.
An idol is focusing only on the visible portion,
Hmm.
so to speak, in,
Hmm.
in the way I'm using it. When you go to Disneyland, like when we go to church and we worship the icons, and like I say, especially Theotokos, we're not worshiping Mary, we're worshiping Christ, and we're not worshiping the wood and the paint underneath. We're worshiping God who created matter. But when
Hmm.
you go to Disneyland, and I would notice this in myself, like I found like last couple of years when I was getting quote unquote interested in Disney, I knew that I like didn't want to get too close. It was like I felt like I was observing like a tribe or something, and then I ended up going native, so to speak. And like I tried really hard to like, yeah, no, no, I just got. I know something's coming over me. I know my unconscious is like telling me to look at Disney, observe it, psychoanalyze it, but I don't want to get too tied in with it, right? And it's some of these things you realize is what I mean is like I noticed there's some deep symbolic energy around these Disney things. But when you go to Disneyland or watch a Disney film, there's no Christ behind it. You're not worshiping the invisible God behind Mickey Mouse. You're worshiping what? Like
Yeah.
what? What are we worshiping? Like nostalgia? Like I think nostalgia is the answer, frankly. Like if I were to put in writing, I'd put nostalgia with a G in front, not like a
Oh, yeah.
nostalgia. Like
Yeah.
truly, like and so it's so interesting to me to just like I almost wish I could interview Disney adults like across the board and be like, just what do you think about Disney? Like just almost probe and see sort of the way they talk about it. Because I know you've mentioned this too, but like those designer homes and stuff
Oh,
of
yeah.
Disney, it's like it's so crazy to me because like what I found so enigmatic about Disney and so nefarious in its innocuousness is how symbols are so important to give people life and meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, frankly, that the Western symbol carrier, the church, is done, broken.
Mm-hmm.
Like the West is just looking for something to fill the place of God. In America, it's mostly politics every 4 years, you know. But like more and more these days, it's like the cult of me.
Well,
And go ahead.
I was just thinking every milestone that you would have in your life, you could have it at Disneyland. You know, your wedding, besides giving birth
Right,
and a
a funeral
funeral,
aside
road,
from a
but
funeral.
like,
Well, that's one of those really interesting things. When I thought about it being a kingdom,
uh-huh.
I thought, it's funny. People listen to this are gonna be like, "Hey, you had a thread there going, and they never picked it up."
I
But
mean,
like
I
on this,
bet you could have a Disney funeral.
well, no, isn't there a story of somebody who like threw their somebody's ashes off like Splash Mountain, and it was like a
Oh, they got in
big,
trouble.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
I was laughing, so I realized like, again, when I was talking about making fiction, it'd almost be funny to make like almost New Yorker cartoons that could almost say more than maybe our long conversations. But like, think about Disneyland. Like, imagine it's almost like a medieval peasant, and we're going to our kingdom. We're
Yeah.
going to the capital for a weekend. There's like a feast
Oh,
weekend, and we're going to
oh, yeah.
celebrate. You know, and we spend all year to get ready for our Mecca trip, and then we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
go to the kingdom and celebrate with everybody. But here's the thing that's crazy about the Disney kingdom: there's no hospitals and there's no legal courts. Like on some level, it's such a crazy, weirder version of uh I don't know what to say, a kingdom, a government,
Right.
like
Yeah. There is, you can go to Disney jail.
yeah, right. I've heard a little bit about that.
There's that. So you were talking about animism and Gaia,
Sure,
and
sure.
you, I'm gonna guess you've never been to Animal Kingdom in Florida.
No, I've seen some videos, but I've not been. So give
So,
me some,
I
hit
mean,
me with
it's
it.
pretty much a zoo mixed with New Age, Gaia,
Yeah, I've
oneness,
seen the Tree of Life,
Tree of
quote
Life.
unquote. Yeah.
They have Pride Rock there, which I heard that that's actually a real place in Africa that's named like Hell's Gate or something like that.
Really? How funny.
Yeah. But yeah, through all of the stories of the rides, it's all about like animism and paganism. And this is my prediction that Disney's going to have a big influence on bringing back tribalism, paganism, just like the worship of this,
Yeah.
the spirit. What is that? Pocahontas. Remember, like
Yeah,
the
totally,
trees
totally.
have a life, and the wind and the spirit of the, like all of the rocks have a consciousness. And
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely. And not only that, you go to Disneyland and see it's one of these things where I guess I Disney to me is almost a satirical, funny, maybe it grains people because we all are relevant to it example of things. Like I really like it as sort of like a very
a
base
microcosm.
yeah, it's a microcosm and it's also a very bad microcosm. Like for me,
Yeah.
it's like up here in Northern California, we have Mount Shasta, not really close to me, but we all know Mount Shasta, right? But if you go, you can drink directly from the base of the
I have
mountain.
done that.
Oh, Lord have mercy. It's so amazing. But it's
Yeah.
like the difference between drinking that and getting that same water bottled 800 miles downstream from like a Walmart gas station. It's like,
Oh,
what would
mhm.
you rather have, you know?
Right.
And so when you talking about animism, I think it's one of these things where like what I mean is it's not just Disney. Our whole idea where you go around now today in a new city and you have your phone and you're like going around and you're like, okay, what's the cool restaurant? What's the site to see? What's this? We're engaging with our world in this way where we believe that every new object we encounter will give us information. The sort of Victorian man of like the 19th century, the explorer kind of, he didn't care about any of that stuff. It's like, we're going to put a flag upon this place and you guys are now British. You know,
Mhm.
it's like the whole, like when you really think of this massive level of the Western psyche inverting itself, like we are so interested in things these days we never would have been interested in.
Mm.
And so what I mean is like, let's say something like even watching an animated cartoon, one of the first ones. Let's say again, you grew up like 1880s or so, and I mean, I'm typecasting here, but like you're just some dignified man of the city or whatever, and you're going to watch these cartoons. Like for the first time in your life, you're seeing, like in every time that the goat would sing or something and its neck would stretch, or these Disney sort of animating things where bad adjective, where the plasticity of matter, where things would be stretched and bent and all sort of weird dimensions. It's like the 20th century has retrieved this weird sort of plasticity of matter and form and shape that was totally unheard of. Like Alice in Wonderland, even pre-Disney, like that
Mm-hmm.
was such a antenna, forerunner of the sort of surrealism that came in the 20th century. And
Good point.
my sort of thing is like Disney, you don't even need it to be surreal in content for it to be surreal.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Just really when you think about a movie theater that people are going into this black space and they're all facing one direction to watch this light coming up against the wall to create these shadowy forms that they
Plato's cave.
then it is Plato
Yeah.
retrieved, man. And it's
Yeah.
like getting back to paganism. It's like the movies are so pagan. And it's like, it's so hard because I love going to movies. Like, what about you guys? Like, have you been with the
I
whole
mean,
change?
that's our job. So we
I know.
we
What
watch a
I mean is,
movie a
how have
day
you been from
almost.
going? Have you been from going from the cinema to having to do it all at home? Do you like going to the movie theater?
I do now it's more of just like a treat, maybe like once or twice a month.
Yeah,
But I do like just doing it at home.
yeah. See,
And
I like going to the theater. I confess.
yeah.
I mean, both are kind of cool, but yeah, anyway, so
I
we
remember,
get
I mean, that's how I grew up like before streaming and all that, like in the 90s. I lived in a
right.
very hot place. So the only cool place to hang
Where'd
out
you
in the
grow up?
town, Hemet, California,
Was it larger metropolitan in that area?
Riverside.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. I grew up
So
Magic Mountain. You know the amusement park, Magic Mountain?
yeah,
Yeah, that's where I'm from.
Valencia.
Yeah.
So it's more the low desert, but like, it was so hot we would decide whose house are we going to hang out at depending on whose parents will run the air conditioner. But so
Or who
the
had a pool.
yeah, the movie theater was the escape. Like it's
Right, right.
nice and cool and refreshing, and you go in there and get programmed. But I've seen, I probably saw
We get a
every movie on the
program.
marquee in the 90s and the 2000s, just because that's what we did. But
Let's go back to animism for a minute because there's so much more we could talk about. Like um animism too, in the sense that like just to go, let's say, to a place like Disneyland and see things moving that should be inanimate,
mm-hmm,
and I guess that's like something to me that we're so inundated with animism for 100 years. We don't even think about it. We
mm,
really don't even think about it. When you think
mm-hmm,
about and I think, frankly, this is what I kind of was trying to say earlier about us being in our little Orthodox kingdom. I don't want to do any type of trying apologetics to overlap these sort of things, because what I mean is like, um, being so inundated with animism, let's say, it's like, well, from the Orthodox perspective, like we kind of don't even care about any of this stuff. It's like we just want to focus on our salvation, and give to the poor and needy and pray and all that kind of stuff. So all that being said, like I'm so fascinated with all this stuff, but I also don't really care ever since I've converted to Orthodoxy. You know what I
I
mean?
know
Like,
that's so interesting because when I first started going to the church and going to like catechumen classes, I had all of this information. I knew all this stuff about like Disney and MK Ultra and occult and witchcraft and stuff. And like they weren't interested in hearing what I had to say concerning those topics, and it would just frustrate me so much. And then I had to go through like, well, I'm here to learn, not teach. I can't just like
right, right.
tell everybody everything that's going on, but because you have to be interested. So I just had, to calm down.
I think I can relate to what you're saying. If what I hear what you're saying and I agree, is this sense that like we've been there. We've been in this stuff that like now that we're in Orthodoxy, there's a lot of people that might not maybe be as aware of these more innocuous yet nefarious sort of powers involved, you could say,
Mm-hmm.
with things like. So let's get back to like. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say a little anecdote is like I started going to this little Orthodox church and I loved being there because it was just there was nothing there to trigger my um when you learn so much, there's almost like a ghoulie behind everything. You can't look anywhere without being, oh, well, that's witchcraft, or that's this, or that's
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I loved being in the church because it was just all icons and beauty and, priest robes and purity. And I felt so serene there. Like there was nothing that I looked at that was like, oh, super wicked, until, you look down at the kids and they're all wearing like Monsters Inc. t-shirt and Cars
I
backpack
know, right?
and like Disney
Well, that's what.
princess. And I'm like, oh, why is this crap in the church? It's like a piece of dookie on.
Well, and especially because you've come from there, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
the thing is, I've noticed, and again, maybe we're getting too far afield here, and I don't want to speak beyond my pay grade at all. But I definitely noticed there's like a difference between cradle Orthodox and converted ones, and it seems
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of the converted people I've met and have seen, there's this very much like you don't realize how precious of a gift you have here in the church.
Mm-hmm.
You really realize what we have here? Like, that's the body and blood of God up there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are you talking before it's Eucharist? Like seriously, bro? Like, and I don't even mean on this moral level. It's on this like cosmic, like, oh, we're in heaven right now, and all you're doing. So like, I'm with you in the sense that it's like,
I it's just
God,
almost like it feels like it's being infiltrated through the ground up through the kids. They're wearing
ooh,
Spider-Man
yeah.
sneakers
So
and
good
like.
point, good point, good point. So this is something that kind of got me on my quest to start looking at Disney in a different way, you could say, is that like my friends started having kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it was interesting because it's like most of my friends are kind of the whole spiritual but not religious, quote unquote. And so it's like, man, for me, it's like I feel so saved by the Lord. Like, I mean, like when I came to Orthodoxy, I mean, I had a straight like vision of Christ in a liturgy service. And I was like, oh, I'm Orthodox, like right away. Like I found myself like walking up to communion, not even knowing that you can't take it. And I'd like not been in a church in years. And it was like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm really underselling that experience. But what I brought that up to say is like, I'm very aware of how precious life is and how easy it is to mess somebody up at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And like the depth work I've gone through over the last 5, 6, 7 years, it's been a lot of work, and it's been a lot of alienation, a lot of tears, a lot of like separating from the norm. And what I realize is like I'm just so thankful that God, Christ has come and like just took me out of that. Like I could have been wandering in this spiritual hellhole. I call it psychedelic prison. Wish I could
Mm-hmm.
trademark it, but
Mm-hmm.
in it for years. And so what I see is like I see my friends, and it's like they're just gonna plant their child in front of that TV. They're just gonna give them Beauty and the Beast. It's no big deal. Let's give him Pocahontas. That's no big deal. Well, let's give him this and that. It's no big deal, right? And then you think like, man, like I see the big deal it did to me,
Yeah.
and it's like I can't even imagine like what it's doing to people so under the surface, like getting back to the collective unconscious, like deep in the bones that we're not even aware of. But that's this thing that before I came Orthodox, again, it's like you never even heard of Orthodox. It's like, oh yeah, Byzantium that existed. Okay,
Yeah.
moving on. Like
Right.
I'm
That
so
was just the
amazed at
dark
like
ages.
yeah, 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 yeah. And then you realize, like, oh, wait, actually, the West, like, kind of actually killed all the Christians in the East and took all the stuff from Byzantium. Like, wow. But, anyways, my point is that, like, when I was more in this world of seeing it only as the Western psyche and basically Christianity, Nietzsche declared God dead, Christianity was dead.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, it's been looking for something. And I just was like really honest, like, man, like, getting back to like watching their kids, showing them Disney movies. It's like if only Christianity made better movies. Like VeggieTales suck compared to Lion King, you know? Like, and so it's one of these things that like you had to be honest, like, wow, like, it's just generally better entertainment than what the Christians produce.
Yeah.
But if I may say one last thing on this note, we know too that we don't want to be of this world. That's what's so beautiful about Orthodoxy is how cleaved and separate it is from all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to sound like it's just so elite, like we're all monks and we don't engage with the world, but we're not trying to make Christianity relevant. Like that's almost what makes VeggieTales so terrible, is that they're trying to like do the pagan thing.
Well, that's why Christian rock will always be lame
Ugh,
because,
tell me about it.
you know, it's just gonna be lame no matter what. It can be the
Right.
best.
That's one of those things that maybe for a whole nother night we could prep more notes. We could talk about technology at Disney, but like when it comes to in McLuhan and media ecology, which I never really got to is like, I mean, if I could throw this little seed out there. So much to me, what's interesting about Disney is when we look at technology over thousands of years, I believe that Disney is kind of the first electric artist who
Mm.
really used electricity as a part of the medium. And what I mean is like when you're talking about the Christian rock bands,
Mm-hmm.
on some level, content is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
What we send in a text can be anything, but the fact is that we're texting,
Mm-hmm.
and that is radically different than sending a letter or telling your neighbor to pass a message along. And so, just the whole idea of what you're saying, that's like one of these really interesting things. Like people are, we wonder like, why is Christian rock so bad? It's like on some level, the content is so irrelevant to the form.
Yeah.
The form of rock and roll music really is its own, it creates its own environment. That's something that when you create Christian moralism inside of it, it's just like, just shatters it, you know?
Yeah. Um, Surrealism, that was a good point because no matter what, like even if you're making a cartoon about people, it's going to look surreal.
Right. And what's so fascinating about cartoons is like, again, like I'm looking at Disney almost as if we're historians 500 years in the future. And
Uh-huh.
we're almost doing this relative, is again, like, I want to be clear if anybody's listening, I'm not trying to make this orthodox. Like, we're putting on our sort of like, we're looking out our castle walls and we're looking at the relativism world. Like, that's something sorry if I may tangent here, but give praise to your husband. Um, I've only listened to Jay's stuff for about a month or so, even though I've been Orthodox for a while, you know, it's just like the way things work, whatever. And I was like, you know, this guy talks a lot about like stuff that's not Orthodox, like talk about Gnosticism, paganism, all these things. But it's not like compromising any orthodoxy. Like there's no problem being informed in all these things
Mm-hmm.
to talk about them, you know,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're not things we bring in with us. So all that being said, like I'm so interested as if we were going to do relativism. You know, we don't really believe in relativism as Christians, but like, let's pretend we're going to be relativistic for a second. We're just going to be secular historians.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't you think it's so crazy that in the middle of Los Angeles in the 20th century, there's like a magic princess castle next to a miniature Switzerland mountain, next to like submarines in a rainforest in a 1900s Americana
Mark
streets? Like,
Twain world.
what will people say of the future when they look at this place? You know, it's like
Yeah.
that to me is what's so interesting about Disneyland. In the same way that we like in all like in the Jungian crowd, like that was to me part of these things that kind of like when I was going now that I've repented from repenting, I mean, let's be honest, from this stuff, like I notice a lot of these like kind of spiritual mythologist people, like they're all into like, oh, let's talk about Gilgamesh, let's talk about like the Kabbalah, let's talk about all this stuff. I'm like, y'all didn't grow up on any of that. Like, let's talk about like Snow White, you know, like
Yeah.
let's talk about Lion King. Like, you know, it's like I
Yeah.
don't know anything about all these ancient myths that have really nothing to do with me on some practical level. You know what I mean? Like I could spend all years being the academic, but if I were to die tomorrow, it's like far more important to me to know what Pinocchio means than
Well,
what
these are
the Iliad means.
very important stories. They have like, I mean, Lion King is almost like Hamlet.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, so um, I guess one thing because I went tangential, but I can't really wrap up too much, but loving what I was trying to say is like the whole idea of watching cartoons
mhm.
is mind blowing to me. like
Mhm.
on the massive level of when you think of like what all of our ancestors went through, and that most of the time they're just peasants working on a farm trying to make our life live. And here we have like grown men gathered around like a board, arguing over like, will the teacup dance with the candlestick? It's like, no, 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 there's no way that could happen. It's like the teacup has to be on top of the cake for this to be perfect, and just thinking
Yeah.
about like, it's amazing to me that these grown men and probably women, but let's be honest, it's probably mostly dudes, like, um, spending all this time to invest in these little line drawings to animate. Like, an animation is a lot of work,
Hmm.
really. Like, it
It's an
takes so
amazing art form.
it
I mean,
truly,
movies like
truly is.
Pinocchio is beautiful artistically. Snow or not Snow White. What's the
I mean,
one?
Bambi is a whole, that one's beautiful.
Bambi. What the one with Aurora?
Sleeping Beauty? Sleeping
Sleeping
Beauty.
Beauty. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that one's incredible. The art in that movie.
Yeah.
Like, and that one's interesting because Disney sort of tangentially, I think, oh man, we're going to get a field here. There's like so many things we could go. But Sleeping Beauty is interesting. So it's really like the last animated project he worked on.
Uh-huh.
So he was putting everything into Disneyland.
Hmm.
Now, a hardcore Disney fan would say Robin Hood was the last, I'm sorry, Jungle Book was the last thing he did. Like, technically, it's true. But like in Disney's interest in animation, Sleeping Beauty was the last one.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really interesting because, again, kind of putting on my relativist historian hat, um, Sleeping Beauty, most of the score is actually Tchaikovsky. So
Hmm.
it's really fascinating to me that, again, if you look at this hundreds of years removed, and if we were to like try to analyze this culture like we analyze the ancient Romans or something, we would say, oh yeah, Western classical music fused with Hollywood in 1959 to create Sleeping Beauty. And it's like the total climax point of both Western classical music and animation.
Hmm.
Because let's be honest, too, like Western classical music sucks after like the 1900s. Like, it's really in the area of film that most classical music has stayed alive.
Looney Tunes,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
They use
I
all
mean,
those.
I love Looney Tunes too, for the record.
Well, they use Tchaikovsky and Wagner and all of those.
And Liszt and all those
Yeah.
guys. Yeah, totally. Totally.
Um, I was gonna say next. What do you think about the transition from animation? Oh, I was gonna say this is the first time an art form was like really directed towards children specifically.
Right, right. Children's programming.
Yeah,
Let's not forget that that's what it's called.
right. And then the transition from animation to CGI, because I think Toy Story is a big piece of crap and I hate that movie. Like it's
It's
the
funny. I was gonna,
what?
we could talk there. So I want to, let's go back a little bit.
Okay.
I think, not to play devil's advocate because I know we're on the same page here, but I love almost doing a disco ball approach, looking at every sequence we can of this thing. Walt said constantly that his films were not for children; they're for
Mm-hmm.
adults and kids. And on
Mm-hmm.
some level, with the trauma program, like in every movie that has these traumatic experiences, you could argue that Walt's actually like, I say this almost to just be provocative. I don't really mean it, but Walt's almost doing us a favor. He's showing, no, look, there's a chance that your mother might die when you're 4 years old. We're not going to sugarcoat it. We're
Mm-hmm.
not going to hide life from you. The fact that people die, and you may experience that at a young age, you know. And so it's interesting stuff like that. Where on one level, the trauma stuff, you can Walt could a Disney person could like defend that as saying like, no, 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 we're actually trying to teach them real lessons at a
Mm-hmm.
young age, that death is a part of life. But the thing is in in the Disney paganism, there is no resurrection. There is no eternal life, and so it's like a lot of these stories, they offer the goods, but they really can't deliver in the
Why
end.
why introduce death if you can't um give them hope, you mean?
Right. But then there will always be, maybe tying it back to Jung too, and the idea of the collective psyche. There will always be this hope for the Christ figure to come at the end of the day, anyways. And you'll
Mm-hmm.
see all of these movies. It's like they always will have the hero resurrection moment. But to me, I would say they're very still BC, or PC, pre Christ, if you want to be almost silly about it, like because
Mhm.
they're PC as well. But
They're
like
woke.
I really believe in truth, that like orthodoxy is the truth, capital T.
Hmm.
Probably not doing it service by saying it there in just one flat sentence, but the point is I believe to be charitable that most of the world doesn't really know Christ unless you find him in the church. So when I watch these Disney films or any Hollywood film, or read basically any story of the fallen Western world, I, on one hand, absolutely believe it's demonically influenced, because ever since Christ's incarnation and resurrection, things have changed. We're not in the BC times anymore, right?
Hmm.
But to maybe give Jung his due, and maybe there's this chance where this stuff is relevant and helpful. I believe in our collective psyche, in the individual psyche for many people, and in the mass psyche, we still don't know Christ,
Hmm.
right? Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, as if we can hope that people still don't yet know Christ, and there's a chance that they're still living in a time where they're awaiting the Messiah.
Hmm.
So what I see is in a lot of these movies and films, it's as if they were written in almost Old Testament time, pre-Christian time, where there's all these foreshadows of the Savior, of wholeness, of healing,
Return of the
of
King.
resurrection, return of the King, but it's not Christ, right?
Right. Right.
And
It's
so
a
to me, it's this
lion.
really right,
Yeah.
right. It's like, to me, so it's this really fascinating thing. Because it's like, on one level, I want to be charitable and to just say, like, look, the world just doesn't know Christ yet. Why are we being so hard on these people?
Mhm.
But it's like, look, no, we know though that time is real, history is real, Christ has happened, the church has been established. We know what we know as Orthodox Christians, and we also know that there's principalities and powers that are tied in all of this stuff. So it's like, it's really difficult, because I really believe there's a kernel, like the fancy $500 Greek word is what? Logos spermatikos, the
Mhm.
seeds of the logos that are in these Disney films, that are in these Hollywood films. Like, I would really like to believe that there is this hope that there's in these, but yet I don't want to be that apologetic,
Yeah.
because let's be honest, like everything you're interested in, like I think that stuff's totally true, like the
Because
conspiracy side of it.
I'm thinking of when you mention classical music and animation, the first thing that comes to mind is Fantasia, which didn't do that well in the box
No.
office. But if you look at it as a tool for mind control programming, it's perfect because what they would do is put children on LSD and sit them in front of Fantasia with a mind
No
control
way.
script. Yeah, I have a
Really?
whole script
Oh my
in my
god.
office that, like, minute by minute, is telling them.
Well, and Fantasia is such an interesting one. Man, I'd like to hear more about
It's
that if
called
you could.
How to Brainwash Your Friends and Family by Fritz Springmeier. Look that up.
Oh, what's his name? Springmeyer? Heard of him. um I'm interested in
So
the sorcerer.
let's just sum up a little bit because we were talking about
Really
Walt's
quick though,
character.
Sorcerer's Apprentice is just an interesting aspect of Fantasia that's like so tied in that whole alchemical thing that like we could do a whole exegesis on that
Yeah,
alone.
yeah.
Okay, so go on.
Um, so Walt's character, he's a enigmatic, dualistic type of personality. I think
Definitely.
he was co-opted. I mean, we all know the way that they work is blackmail and bribery.
Hmm.
So,
I think with Walt, it's so interesting because like when you get into the Gnosticism side of it, it's like so much. Do you know any kind of stuff about the general Gnostic myth kind of characters? And okay, so
your
Yaldabaoth, he's like
Pleroma
the
is,
Pleroma and
yeah, and then
Sophia
you have
Bell, and
the architect
yeah.
and
So the architect, so the demiurge Yaldabaoth,
uh-huh.
Yaldibaldi,
He,
he is like,
who's the lion with the snake body? Is that him?
that's Abraxas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's this whole other thing. And that gets into Jungian stuff. It's just like heresy, heresy. But anyways, it's interesting because like when I kind of had my Gnostic lens on and I was seeing everything through this like Gnostic lens, and it's like that's the thing is like what I kind of referenced earlier with sort of my story, but didn't really go into, is like from my experiences, I found that I was living this Gnostic life. Like once I discovered Gnosticism, I was like, wow, this lines up a lot with my visions and all this stuff, like my dreams and blah, blah, blah. So like I just kind of assumed that Gnosticism was this sort of collective mythology that we're all living in.
Mhm.
And we're just sort of forced to live in it. Like the same way we're forced to use these iPhones to communicate with one another. The world's just Gnostic and that's what it is. And we're just going to deal with it. Thank God that's not the answer. And there's also the other side of the coin. But all that being said, I do believe the Western world, fallen world, is essentially Gnostic more than anything else. And all that being said, like Disney is a very fascinating Gnostic figure because like on one level he is the trapped Sophianic soul who's looking for her expression in all of matter, trying to release the energy through matter. And the other level, he's Yaldabaoth. He's the total tyrant god demiurge
Mm.
who's like in control of programming everything. And so it's so
Mm-hmm.
fascinating to me just on that
Well,
sort of.
it in a real way because he was like, the architect of like the Disneyland, so he created his own like
Do you know
world.
that quote? You know that quote he said where somebody was like, well, why don't you run for president? And he's like, why would I run for president when I'm king of Disneyland?
Oh yeah. Yeah. What a character. So,
We could let's see, I'm kind of looking at my notes. What do you think about Epcot? Meaning not this Epcot, but the one that he was planning on making.
mhm.
I think without, again, like it's fun to chat about this stuff. I'm having a lot of fun, but like I really have the fear of God that I can't forget about. And what that means is like I don't want to speculate too far beyond something just because it's like, oh, it's so fun. Let's talk about this stuff. But a part of me wonders, like, man, did like God cut Walt off at the right time? Like, was he meant to die at that point? Like, had he really
Oh,
made it hot? Like, was there or did Providence step in so that didn't happen? On some level.
yeah, because Epcot stands for Experimental Prototype Civilization of Tomorrow.
Or community of tomorrow, but
Community of
still,
Tomorrow.
what's the
Yeah,
point?
they were like
What's the
vacillating
difference,
back
right?
and forth. Yeah. But
Oh,
so
really?
you've got all of these big contractors. You've got like Werner von Braun, the
Yeah.
NIZI
Mm-hmm.
Rocketeer, who's like best friends
Mm-hmm.
with Disney. You've got him. You've got the FBI working with the Mickey Mouse Club and filming episodes at the
Really?
Pentagon.
You gotta
And
send me this
yeah,
stuff. Yeah, yeah. Is this all come from Springmeyer or?
no, this is just like my all of my
Sure.
research. Yeah, in my books and stuff.
We should I'm just having fun, but one day maybe I'll write the inner side of the tail, you write the outer side. We'll
Yeah.
combine works.
So where's my card on Disney World? CIA. Okay, so there it is. In the 60s, um, you've got Disney operatives engaged in like this conspiracy to make sure that sellers had no idea who was buying the property in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a key contact named William Wild Bill Donovan, who was like the father of the CIA. And he provided like fake identities for Disney agents to buy property and set up secret communications center and a disinfo campaign to like maintain control over all of the development. I mean, this goes really deep. And then you have this guy named Paul Hellawell who launched a secret CIA war in Indochina. So you've got all these guys that know disinfo, they know how
It's
to.
crazy because Disney's just so innocuous. Like that's the thing is like I'm hearing from what you're saying is like all this stuff can go so under the radar of the Mickey Mouse ears,
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
So I mean, people who are like doing psyops against Castro come to work for Disney World.
Really?
Yes, and they want to come up with a way to avoid taxation and like environmental regulations, and they want immunity from the Constitution.
Wow. And
Yeah.
isn't there jumping way ahead in the decades? isn't there that like boat ride in Epcot where you're just like going around looking at all the future programming food that's like going to be programmed into our world or
Well,
something like that?
the way
I'm
that
being
it's
I'm being cheeky about it, but
no, okay, so the way that it's set up, like you enter into
what's that
Epcot,
ride?
let's say,
What's the one I'm? Oh, go on. Just tell me what you're gonna go with.
and that's the one with the big white golf ball, right?
Yeah, that's
You
Epcot.
have to give your fingerprint to get in there. They do facial recognition. They have all your
They
credit
do that
card
at
information.
Disneyland now too. Not thumbprint though.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah. So, and this was like in 2010, earlier than
Well,
that.
this is a really good example, like not to just like wave the flag and like tell everybody to wake up, but like this is a good example. Is like we all know that when they want to jab and stab us, it's like a whole different story.
Mhm.
But no one's is like opposed to it when it's like going to Disneyland. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
this sense that like to me, what is the alarming thing, and it's nothing new, right? This is like the problem of mankind from all ages, is like when it has that aesthetic, enticing cherry on top, you're like so much more willing to just give away everything you have for the sake of the experience,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
it's like that's the thing that's like so I just want to like again, like I don't really want to just go and shake people because I have so much more things that are more important. But like if I had 20 minutes to like shake up a Disney adult, I would. But like what I mean is like um the way that the bells and whistles can just be so distracting. It's like the part that makes me really sad is that it's like religion in the West has nothing to counter for something like going to Disneyland. Like
Mm.
I really mean it. Like, and I don't say that happily. I mean, happily, I just tell people, come to our church, come to Orthodoxy. You'll be very happy. But if
There's
you're gonna stay
no,
in the Western world, like
yeah.
good luck, man. Like good luck.
Yeah, there's no submersive experience outside the Orthodox Church for
You got it.
Christianity.
That's it. Thank you. Yeah, those are the
Um,
words I was trying to look for. Like, and so the theme park offers this experience,
yeah.
right? That like, and
Yeah.
I don't
Or
want to try to
even,
do apologetics for it, but it really does a much more quote unquote holistic experience than going to your evangelical megachurch.
mhm. And well, and it's not like a mega church is just a concert and a pep rally and a motivational speaker,
Right.
right? So it's not
Right.
even as good
Well,
as
right. See, like Disneyland is in a way. I'm sorry to cut you off. Getting so
that's
excited.
okay. Go ahead.
I was gonna say Disneyland is almost more liturgical in the sense that you participate. Like that's the thing is like I again, it's not one to one. It's not like Disneyland is so antichrist. It's that obvious match overlap kind of deal. But there's a lot of parallels, and like what I mean is like,
I would argue that it is, but
okay, well then cool. Then I'll go with
yeah.
you on there. Like let's do it.
I'll
Let's
jump
do it.
on
I just want to
that,
build.
but go
Let
ahead.
me just we'll just have to build more of a case so we can prove it
Yeah.
to the masses. But no. But so what I mean is like let's say I've tried to explain orthodoxy to some people, right? And you just realize, like, I don't know, it's difficult. It's difficult
Mhm.
depending on who you're talking to and the context. But we all know that nobody knows what Disneyland's like until you go. You can't even talk about Disneyland unless you're in Disneyland. There's
Mhm.
certain features of Disneyland you can't access unless you're in Disneyland.
Mhm.
It's that I don't want to say same, but it's that way in church. It's
Yeah.
that way in liturgy. You don't know these things until you step into it. And so to me, it's one of these things that, like you said about the Protestant evangelical thing, when you're going to a mega church experience, you're not going into the other kingdom. You're just going to a rock concert. You're going to a lecture. You're going to some weird kind of possibly jazzercise Taibo, get you all exerted and speaking in tongues. But
Laser light show.
whatever
Yeah.
it is, it's not participatory in the same way as the freedom, quote unquote, you get when you go to Disneyland.
Yeah.
And I say that, of course, like I'm not trying to hold Disneyland up. I'm still constantly saying, come to liturgy. But we're saying in terms of this fallen world, Disneyland is like way better than Christianity, Western Christianity. And
Mhm.
I don't mean that to say like I'm supporting it. I say that to mean like, wake up, Christians. What are you gonna do
Yeah, it's
to
a more
do
inclusive
to
experience. Like,
I think like Western Christians are okay, here I go saying what I think. Forgive me, Lord, jeez. But they're really liable, culpable, wrong word, susceptible to being more interested in secular pop culture entertainment because the Western Christian symbolic container is broken. It's
Mm-hmm.
totally broken.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when Nietzsche declared the death of God, less than 100 years later, Disney countered with the Magic Kingdom. You know, and in the West, it's like, which one are you going to choose? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like for me, it's like I almost again, I wish I could write a story because I don't want to sound like some crazy Disney nut, you know, but it's just like, man, like Disney is such a strong competitor. And again, I say Disney sort of writ large for secular pop culture entertainment. The thing is like Apple doesn't have an amusement park for you to go to.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook doesn't have all these stories that are ingrained in childhood. Like Disney just has such an edge on the Western psyche, and that these things get into our souls so young, that like there's really no chance in hell in the West for like I believe like Western religion to compete against Hollywood for people's attention, to say
Yeah.
it the least. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, the hope is that people will get out if they're obviously focused on the truth and they don't want to just be um, entertained constantly. You know, if they're really seeking the truth, no, there's no loss. I have total faith that people will get out. But if people are like just looking to be entertained by God, they're just looking to have a good time with their religion, they're looking to be happy, you know, and all that stuff. It's like you might as well just go to Disneyland and go to church. Forgive me for me talking that way,
Well,
but like,
no, because they advertise it as happiest place on earth,
right?
right?
And it's like,
So,
think about it. Small World, the Small World is like an anthem for the New World Order
yeah.
that no Christian hymn has been able to compete with on some level, you
Well,
know?
they're sponsored by UNESCO.
Oh,
And
yeah,
if
right?
you go to UNESCO's website, well, I did a couple months ago, but the homepage of their website is a kid getting
Jabbing.
yeah, saying
Ooh,
nobody left behind or something like that. And
you know, I got,
it was phrased in such a way that had a creepy double meaning,
right.
right? No child left behind or nobody gets out of this or something like that.
Yeah. Or like, hey, you ain't getting out of this. You ain't
Yeah.
getting out of this. It's funny.
And
I just got a AI bot text today telling me my kit for my needle will be arriving soon. So
oh,
that's good to know, I
good.
guess. Like
Good
I was
citizen.
like,
Um, let me finish my thing on Epcot and then I want to talk about Monsters Inc. and then I think we're gonna have to wrap it up because it's
sure.
gonna go on two
Yeah,
and
and
a
then
half hours.
I'll ask you the Disney questions I had for you.
Oh yeah. So when you go to Epcot, you give them your biometrics, you give them your facial recognition, you give them your thumbprint, all your credit card information, and then you go in that Buckyball, the big golf ball called from
You call it
Sea.
Buckyball because of Buckminster Fuller?
Yeah.
Nice. Good
Um,
pun. Good.
and
Good.
the story of that ride is the history of or communications throughout
Oh, and that was
history.
written, wasn't it written by Ray Bradbury? He
Oh, oh,
I know.
probably.
I remember hearing that back
Oh,
in the day
okay.
in my
That would make
research.
a lot of
Yeah.
sense
Yeah, Ray
because
Bradbury wrote the script for that ride.
oh, that makes so much sense because it's all about like in caveman times, we used pictures on walls and then we developed, papyrus and cuneiform and, then we like had like ink and paper and now we have telephones and then we're going to have the internet. And it's like you're just going through the history and they're telling you we control all of this communication in
Mm.
a weird way.
When you say we, you're saying like the human race, they're saying, or we at
That's
Disneyland.
what they're saying. Like we at Disney have taken all of this and like
Miniaturized it. You brought it
yeah,
into the park.
and made it into this new matrix of technology that we're presenting to you because the sponsor of that ride is Siemens.
It's okay. So this is a fascinating example. Who's Siemens? Tell me.
Siemens was a NAZA corporation, um, technologies. and you could see above the concentration camps like
Mm,
the Siemens logo, the same logo that you see above the Epcot.
wow.
This is how far back these sponsors are going.
This is something that, forgive me if this tie-in footnote doesn't really bear much fruit, but that's one of these things again I'm talking about with form and content. It's
Mm-hmm.
a great example where these technological forms that used to just be what we used to communicate have now been recontextualized as content within this new form of the
Mm-hmm.
theme park, of the roller coaster.
I
You're
think
now seeing,
yeah,
yeah,
that's exactly
all
what they're
these,
trying to tell you.
right. And so it's almost saying the new environment is not all of these tools, but it's the fact that now you are the content, I guess, somehow,
Mhm.
inside of our form. It's a little stoner 101 kind of sounding
Yeah,
talk.
it's like the impression I got from it is like the same people who control the flow of information have now converged in this like new technological world, this Disney world, this experimental civilization. And we're going to continue to control the narrative to suit us. That's the impression an aware person gets riding that ride. But
Right.
then behind that, you have this lake that's called the Pond of Illumination,
Huh.
right?
That reminded me immediately, without any reference. I thought
Mm-hmm.
of the Arthurian stories of like the Lady in the Lake,
Uh-huh.
or
Yeah.
just I'm just doing pattern recognition. But I was like, oh, it's another interesting. So many mythological retrievals in Disney.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because they've got like the Black Cauldron and they have like the classic Grimm's fairy tales. So like folklore that has been around for a long, long time. They repackaged it and made it into a cartoon.
Well, and that's the thing is like people they'll always poop on Disney because they're like, oh, they changed the ending and real Grimm's fairy tales are so dark and Disney made them all happy. And it's like, yeah, I agree. But again, kind of pulling my like relativist historian card, I think it's so interesting because it's almost saying like, look, I know that's true, but it's also saying this is just what the culture was expressing at the time. It's as if nihilism, it's like on some level I see Disney again, it's all inside the broken world, fallen world, but Disney is almost this very interesting counter response to nihilism. And I don't really mean that because obviously underpinning Disney is all of that tyrannical, nihilistic, controlling stuff. But in terms of content, what you're seeing inside the images is very much like, you know, happiness, family values.
Mm-hmm.
There's still goodness in the world. It's like on some level, I was so intrigued by Disney because I thought, in the 20th century, and you look at all the dark, just frankly soul crushing art that came out.
Yeah.
It's like I thought
Brutalism.
Disney was like the only optimistic stuff out there.
Right.
And it's like, is this what we're left with if we want optimism in the world? Like Walt Disney, really? Like, so that to me became this very interesting like stuff of two alternatives. You get your Android or your iPhone. You get either like Sartre and Camus and the like existentialists and stuff, or you get Disney. And so you
Mm-hmm.
kind of have to choose between these, yeah, two extremes. I don't know. That's just something that I've kind
I
of
feel like that is a veneer to make it more palatable to
definitely,
introduce
yeah,
more
definitely.
esoteric like witchcraft and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think it's truly naive and innocent. It's only a surface level thing for
Did you
sure.
know that the Disney cruise used to go right by the island of how is it? Jepstein Effrey?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Little St. James is off the coast of St. Thomas, which is a port on the Disney Cruise Line, and they had like
Is that the Virgin Islands down there?
yeah,
Do you know? Okay.
and like they had excursions where they would take kids called Captain Nautica's snorkeling expedition that took you right by there.
The Steinland?
The island of
Stein.
You know who
Spy,
I'm
yeah,
talking about, right?
Bergs. Yeah,
The guy who didn't kill himself.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to do my own
Yeah.
little pun. Steinland, something. I get what you're saying. Spurgland. No, wait, that's not right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I found this picture where the Mirror, the UK Mirror, organized a Disney day out for the kids at this place called Longleat House in Wiltshire, where Ghislaine, you know her,
Mm-hmm.
Maxw, um, she was there and she was like giving a check for the Save the Children's Fund. So these people,
Hmm.
and ABC is terrible. And then you have that whole thing that came out. So I've been talking about Disney so long.
Well, there's this interesting thing too with like
Mm-hmm.
the "Don't Say GAY" thing that came out like in Florida. And there's this like weird overlap where it's like Disney wants to please the business side, and they also want to please the popular world. And so I find them also this very interesting place of having to like appease all these parties that are just like, yeah, it's kind of hilarious to watch.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. There's just all these connections. I'm not going to go into all of that data right now, but it's bigger than you would ever imagine. And it's like the rat hole
The
goes
mouse
so deep.
hole.
Yes. Um, and
You
I
could
wanted to,
say it goes all the way to Wonderland.
well, did you know that the Disney Studios, one of their first projects was the Alice in Wonderland, not the movie, but the live
Right. Those
action
shorts.
plus animation.
Yeah, it was so
Alice's
interesting.
Adventures.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because even in that context, I believe what Walt did was bring the live action girl into animated
Mm-hmm.
films. Is that like what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is interesting because I guess like even in the day that was an inversion of like it was more normal for people to film and add cartoon,
Mm-hmm.
and he did like this inversion of it. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like in many ways Walt himself was kind of always ahead of the crowd and yet became it. I guess something if I were to, I know we're wrapping up here shortly. So I guess like one of the things that interests me about Walt Disney and his legacy is like when I was watching a couple of years ago. Man, it's so funny because like before we were chatting, I was like, oh, I wonder what we're gonna talk about tonight and all these angles. I was like, wow, there's so many things like we did not even touch on. It'd be so fascinating. Like we could do a whole hour on Beauty and the Beast, man. Like we could talk about
Mm-hmm.
so much stuff. But like, so that being said, like when I was watching that Imagineering documentary, you watched that one a few years ago, a couple of years ago, or whatever,
Maybe.
about the making of the parks or whatever. It was again, I wasn't really interested in Disney at the time, but kind of like kicked off this stuff. And as I was watching it, I was like, wow, like it's very much like a religion in the sense that, again, I knew nothing about real orthodoxy at the time. I thought it was all more relativistic, but I thought, like, you know, you have a guy who founds a religion, he teaches people stuff, all these things, and then he dies. And his symbol, his message, if you want to say that, gets carried on long after his death. And it becomes this thing so much greater than the man himself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's what's just so fascinating to me about Disney is like right here in our time, over the less than 200 years, we can see the birth of I mean, what do you want to call it? A cult, a religion, a business, whatever you want to call it. Like the birth of a corpus, a body
Mm-hmm.
out of the individual, growing through the means of a symbol, the unifying symbol of Mickey Mouse, the three circles,
Mm-hmm.
and how that births this larger thing from it, you know? And it's like, yeah, I don't really have finite answers or this or really solutions right away. I'm just so interested at like looking at this thing, you
I
know,
have
and
a weird picture since you called it a cult. I agree with that. Of Walt sketching the mouse ears, and it's like inside of a pentagram. So he's got like,
oh, that's lovely.
yeah. So I'll try and like make it for you. But if you watch this movie called Disney on the Front Lines, it's all about the propaganda stuff, and it just has like little clips of they throw in of
Mm-hmm,
black and
mm-hmm.
white things. He's just doodling or whatever and showing you he wants the Mickey to be, but it's something like that,
Oh yeah,
you know.
totally.
Or but it's
Wow.
upside down. I'm sorry. It's like,
Yeah, no, I got you.
totally
Put it right side up. You put it right
pentagram
side up.
looking. And
You know, if I may, again, it's scandalous image, but like something dawned on me when I was more in my crazy like Gnostic phase, and like which I didn't even touch on here when I was like truly like far crazier, like really almost like crazy. But
mhm,
like I remember, and I again knew very little Christianity at the time, but I remember laughing to myself because I saw like the three circles of the Mickey Mouse ears. And I almost saw in this weird perspective, kind of like this image in my mind of like a person on a crucifix in the center and the two thieves on either
mhm,
side, and like
mhm.
these weird almost halos around them, And I was like, wow, even like in our own crucifixion scene of like the center and the two offside of him, it's like even that can be perverted
Yeah,
and distorted and twisted into this weird Mickey symbol of the circle and the two others,
it is a
And
trinity of circles, isn't it?
yeah, which
Yeah,
again, like we're not we don't mean anything by this. I mean, we do. We're just
we're
trying to
just
say that these
speculating on
symbols
stuff.
these symbols have patterns that they're related to, in terms of their ultimate final meaning. That's always variable, and dynamic, we could say, but like definitely the patterns are there. Like the skeletal similarities are there between a lot of these Disney and you could say like mythology, esoteric mythologies, I
Yeah.
guess.
Have you seen Monsters Inc?
I've seen the original. Yeah, I've never seen the sequels.
So that one, a lot of people who come out of the occult, they say that that has a lot more depth and realism into it than people realize.
In which
Because
sense? Say more.
just that the creatures in the other dimension, you want to call them demons or whatever,
We'll be charitable and call them monsters, whatever.
the monsters get energy from causing fear in children,
Oh yeah.
and that's how
Huh.
it powers their world,
I'm
right?
curious. By the end of the movie, though, let's put our hats on here. Is one of the characters things like, no, I'm not going to scare people anymore, or are they
Yeah.
trying to keep their scare going the whole time? I don't
No,
really quite
so
remember how it
the
ends.
movie is all about how they have to keep scaring the kids to power their world, and then the one monster, Sully, like has a heart for the little girl and
That's
doesn't
right.
want to
Boom.
scare her anymore. And they figure
Right, right.
out that children's laughter is a more powerful source of energy than their fear.
That's programmed. That's some stuff right there. Think
Yeah.
about it. It's like, and what does our Lord say? Oh man, I'm terrible with quoting scripture. I just know that he says, "Woe to you who laugh now." It's in the Beatitudes.
Uh-huh.
Uh, he basically says, I should pull it out. Oh God, forgive me, terrible for even bringing it up. But the whole idea that laughter is not really something that we he doesn't say blessed are those who laugh, let's put it
Mm-hmm.
that way.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, what I hear in that, I'm reaching, but like being poetic here, the idea, it's like, oh yeah, let's not, fear, that's too obviously like a thing that we don't want to prey upon people, but laughter, like that's this way better currency that's like it's not harming anybody.
Well, you're still interacting with monsters, no matter if they're real,
Yeah, good point.
right?
Good point, man. It's like, and that's the part, they make these things so cute that you don't realize you're
They
like,
have weaponized cuteness. I'm telling you, like cuteness is this like force of the universe that is something to be reckoned with. And I never underestimate cuteness.
yeah, yeah, and it's again one of those things that's become so flipped and inverted in our world, where like when you think about how cute a baby is, like there's nothing sinister about that, right? But it's like
Mhm.
we almost grow up looking. We're now we look at a child and like, oh, you just might become like a murderer one day, or just like everything is just like the cuteness being embedded with, like you're saying, like just this nefariousness with it. It's like even something like the innocence of children, we can't even like look at the same way these days.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's kind of what I was
So,
thinking.
what were your questions for
All
me?
right, so I got some rapid fire questions for you. We'll
Okay.
see. Just Disney related. All right.
Okay.
What's your favorite Disney movie by decade? So it doesn't have to be just one. We can kind of go through,
Okay.
like
I don't know exactly when all the movies
that's
fall.
fine.
Okay.
That's fine. I'm
So,
just saying, I'm not limiting
I
it to like, one
yeah,
if you
I
want.
do not like Snow White. I do like Pinocchio.
Mhm.
Um, Bambi was okay. Mary Poppins is my favorite movie of all time.
That one's pretty good, pretty darn good. Like I gotta be
Um,
honest, like I
I can
really
watch
like
that anytime, any day.
it.
Yeah. Like when I'm sick, I will put it on because it makes me feel better. I
I think sorry, can I make a comment? I thought
Mhm.
when I was like going through my Disney dive, which I'm almost laughing, like maybe I should do some weird funny story about like my long journey into like Disney and alchemy. But all that being said, when I got to Mary Poppins in my sort of journey, I was so blown away by like the symbolism of a kite. Because like being somebody that like I kind of struggle with like spiritual highness and pray list, to be totally honest, like and just like wanting spiritual experiences and all that kind of stuff, like bordering on addiction kind of
Mhm.
deal. And the kite is so beautiful because it's like here's this thing to like fly in the sky and be totally free and let the air spirit blow you, and yet you're like tied and tethered and held to the ground, you know. I was
Mhm.
like so inspired after I saw that movie. I even made a kite and I like went to the beach and like flew it out. It was like so exciting. Okay,
Yeah,
so
like you said at the end, it's all about the integration of the family because I write a lot about how Disney uses the death of the mother in particular as a plot point in a traumatizing experience.
it's one of
So,
those things that I think it'd be fun almost too one day, like if we just chose a single movie to sort of walk around and use as a point of departure or something, or like certain themes in movies, because I see the death of the mother on some level. I agree entirely. But I would almost say underneath that, perhaps, or above that, is the idea that's like the whole feminine, you could say, is lost in Western culture.
mhm.
You know, we have that in the church with the Theotokos and the church itself being this very feminine thing. But that's one of these things I almost like, again, not to be apologetics for it, but it's like, okay, oh, well, maybe it's just symptomatic in many ways of our Western psyche. We're so lost of the feminine that it's like every movie needs to have the death of the mother to sort of show where we're at, you know, on some level.
Before I became Orthodox, I wrote this book and I was talking about Earth needs mothers
Mm,
and instead of Mother Earth, and I
yeah,
was
yeah, I
talking
love
about
it.
the death of the mother, and I was kind of reading a lot of like cosmic Christian stuff. And they
Yeah,
would
I did my
talk about
some of
how the
that.
Holy Spirit was the female part of the
Oh
Trinity.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I kind of jumped on that and I was like, well, they're killing the
Yeah,
Holy
me too.
Spirit. But oh really? Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, I
So
got into that for sure.
that was where I
Well,
was
it's
coming
hard
from back
because
then.
maybe it's something like Jay could like roll his eyes and inform us on, or somebody else above our pay grade. But like, there is a precedent for that in Jewish, or in the language of words back in the day, that certain ones would have, you
Like
know, feminine
Shekinah and
or
stuff like that.
exactly. That's what I was
Yeah.
gonna get at. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, way beyond my sort of scope of things, but it is it there's a precedent for that stuff getting confused over time, you could
Yes. I
say.
know now that it has no gender, but
Right,
like
right,
in
right,
my
right, right.
mind, I was like, well, that's an obvious,
Well,
correlation.
that's one of those things, like you're saying, that's what led me almost so astray in my Disney thing. Because like when I was in my depression, I was almost like, you know, the Holy Spirit is present in everything. I would call it the Tao or the Force or whatever, you know, back in the day. Again, the Holy Spirit is not like the Tao, but back in the day when I didn't really know these things as well,
Hmm.
I was like, you know, the Force, the Tao, the Spirit has to exist at Disneyland or it doesn't exist anywhere. You know,
Hmm.
it's like it's got to be everywhere or nowhere. You know, but then when I started sort of doing that, put the theory before experience horse, I found that in every Disney film, oh, this feminine spirit in everything. There's this
Hmm.
feminine spirit, you know, and it's weird because there kind of is in a lot of Disney films,
Well,
but
yeah, because look at the Blue Fairy in Pinocchio, and
right, right. And
like
isn't there like a feminine spirit lady in Pocahontas too, some level? It's the
the old
tree.
tree lady, Grandma Willow,
And then there's
like
even
fairy
a newer
godmother.
film, but Princess and the Frog. There's like the lady, she's like the kind of bayou lady who's
Hmm.
like kind of their witch figure as well.
Hmm.
And man, we could, oh, not to mention the three fairies, Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah.
So
Okay.
getting back to your question,
Yeah,
okay,
okay,
Mary
more
Poppins is
questions.
my favorite. I loved Lion King because it came out, I was like 12 years old. I mean, that was
Uh-huh.
like I memorized every single song, every single like line.
Oh, we'll get to those. Those are my questions. But
Yeah, I loved obviously Little Mermaid, Lion King, Beauty and the Beast was beautiful. Aladdin was mid.
that's
Uh,
funny. That was one of my favorites growing up. Aladdin was like
oh
top
really?
of yeah.
What came after that?
I don't know, man. Like after the computer
Hunchback?
era, yeah, like that's kind of where I checked out. It was like
After
Hunchback.
they made Toy Story, I was like, this is gross.
Yeah, what's up with Toy Story? What do you despise about Toy Story?
Because I think it's stupid and I think the character
Well,
I think, oh, Buzz Lightyear is stupid, and he turned out to be something else in the sequel. Did you see his new movie that came out?
I did not see the new one. No, I'm surprised you guys
So
slogged through that one.
Buzz, he's
He's
doesn't
G.
yeah,
Really?
yeah,
Seriously?
yeah. So
Oh,
I'm
no
like, I
wonder no
knew
one's
Toy
talking
Story
about
was,
this
and I
movie.
hate what's the guy who sings the stupid friend song?
Yeah,
Randy
Newman.
Newman. I
Newman.
hate his
Yeah.
music. I hated
All
the
right, we won't talk about
CGI.
Toy
I think
Story. We won't talk about Toy Story.
it killed the whole like art form of animation because every movie after that
I was
had to
gonna
be
say that.
CGI.
So this is another thing. Like, if we wanted to talk about levels, because you were, well, I thought you were gonna get at way earlier, and we were talking about the move from animation to CGI. I thought you were going to say the move from animation to the theme park because on some level we moved from 2D to 3D
Oh yeah.
once we get into the park. And then so it's like, yeah, CGI is this whole other thing, but I'm with you, man. Like my whole Disney interest like entirely stops like once we hit computers. Like I really don't care about any of that stuff. Okay. So I was going to say, what's your favorite? So if I may say, Toy Story, I think is interesting. It's one of these ideas where one level of analysis is like Woody represents the sort of pre-electric man. He's the cowboy on the frontier,
Hmm.
very literally. He's
Yeah.
the individual who's going out into this environment where he has no identity, and you create a name for yourself. You become the sort of ideal of the Western American Clint Eastwood type of figure who becomes completely obsolesced by Buzz Lightyear, who's the new electric man of the future.
Hmm.
And so this whole other level of like Woody, oh man, it's so like I would have to probably spend more time analyzing it, but like Buzz is almost this, there's this interesting idea of like, again, forgive me here because I don't have like a total exegesis, but it's the idea to me that's like in our notion of the individual versus the person.
Hmm.
In Orthodoxy, we are people, we're not individuals who are just these things. In many ways, the Toy story is this move from being an individual to being a person. Woody's identity is only known through being an object toy of Andy's, you
Hmm.
know, and Buzz Lightyear thinks he's a person. So there's
Hmm.
this very interesting like clash of identities and who you are, so to speak, and who your role is in relation to your higher power, I guess, on some level. So again, I'm just kind of probing, but like, yeah, there's some interesting stuff in there. But it's funny, I saw Cars for the first time like last year. I was
Uh-huh.
like, this movie's way better than Toy Story. I was like,
Yeah.
I had a soft spot for Cars. I won't lie. I thought it was kind of funny.
I'm trying to think
All
if
right,
I
so
liked any of them from the past like 10 or 15 years.
we'll see what I liked about these movies is I would analyze them almost structurally.
Uh-huh.
So like I didn't care about the jokes, didn't really care about the characters. I was just so interested in like what's going on with the dynamics, the wholeness. Where is it contained and how is it broken and how does it compensate and readjust itself?
Hmm.
So that there's always this sort of balance from the beginning to the end of the story. And so Cars is a really interesting story because you have this guy who thinks he's like tough shit, and then he like basically loses everything, has to enter into this world of with the bumpkins and all these people he would never want to associate with. And then he finds, you could say, if you're going to be like all self-help and spiritual, he digs into his self, finds those parts of himself that he had been denying, and together they work, and he's able to come out on top and save the day and win the race. So it's
Mhm.
like, it's an interesting story about like digging into the unconscious and learning about yourself through these sort of shadowy figures.
Did you
Anywho,
did you see Jordan Peterson talking about Pinocchio?
yeah, that's one of these other things. I'm also like, is that what it's about though? You
Are
know,
we
like,
reading too much into these things? I don't.
yeah, and I'm like, because it's like, and I know like even John Pajot guy talks about it, and I'm like, I don't even know where to weigh in on this at all. I don't need to weigh in for the record, but
Yeah.
like, it's like, why would the son need to save God? Like, I just don't get that. You know, it's
Yeah.
like God doesn't need help, but and
Right.
anyway, it's like, all right, let me ask you some more questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, what's your favorite Pixar movie, if any?
Oh, Pixar. Give me some examples.
I don't know, all the computer ones. Um, Nemo, Cars,
Okay, I did like
Wall-E.
that one.
Which one?
Finding Nemo.
Finding Nemo.
Just because I like sea creatures, so
Yeah.
I'll give them a pass for that.
All right. Let's see. My favorite Pixar. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Cars. To be honest. But what's your favorite ride? Disneyland or Disney World? Or both, whatever. Or none, if you have no interest in any of that
Um,
stuff.
okay, favorite. Well, the scariest one that I've been on was the Yeti one in the Animal Kingdom.
I know of it. I've not been on it, obviously,
Okay,
but
that
yeah.
one's was
Scary because
legitimately
it was like
scary.
actually scary as a roller coaster, or more of like
Yeah.
the
Well,
thematic
the
stuff they
stuff and
were.
everything going on, I was like, I don't like this. Yeah, so that's gotta be the scariest one. I did like the Avatar ride. Um, I do like going on Thunder Mountain Railroad, the
Doesn't
rails.
that one have a weird piece of like esoteric
It does.
something or another, like in the line there,
It,
or
if you can see
get
that
a
right
book,
there,
people. There it is.
that's a picture from Thunder Mountain. And it says HBIF's working tools, and it's got
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Masonic
yeah. What's the
plum
story
and
on?
everything on there. Like,
Wow.
yeah.
Man, it's so crazy too because like what we didn't touch on is like the whole idea that like America itself is Masonic.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, yeah, yeah. We can like talk about it all being tied in Disneyland. Okay, what's favorite like musical score from a Disney? Like Mary Poppins. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Um,
about song? Like if you had a favorite song, at least one that comes top of your head.
I used to sing Lion King all the time. I used to sing
Which
Beauty and
one?
the Beast.
Man, it's funny because like that's one of these things that I had to be again really honest with myself. Like as a trained classical musician,
Uh-huh.
like Disney writes really good songs.
I
Like these
know.
Broadway, like because I'll be honest, I like musicals. I love me a good musical, man. Like
Me too. I can't
operas,
get anyone to
operas
watch
and
musical with me, but I love them.
operas and musicals take so much work to construct that like when you realize like how much goes into it, it's incredible. And
Yeah.
so like when I like so to me, I'll be honest, like Be My Guest, Be Our Guest is such
Oh,
a good
yeah.
like
And like putting
from
out
a
a
musical
cartoon
point
with
of view,
like
this like
5 or 6 bangers in it. Like, what? This is great.
dude, how do they
Yeah.
do that stuff,
I
And
know.
it's like, hey, and it's like, man, maybe this isn't fair. Maybe it's a weird other point, but like that guy who wrote all those songs, Howard Ashman, I think's his name, or like because also he was GAY, and I'm like, and not like it's a thing where we need to be like, well, just because he was this way, it means all these things. But it is also interesting that like I don't know, because he died young of AIDS too, like right at the
Mm.
height of all that stuff. And there's this way that's almost like really tragic. We're in a way of not really sounding like, oh, we're so orthodox and poor him, It's like to me, I thought is even at the time, like just really like kind of bittersweet the way life is. Cause it's like, even though I can't judge this man's choices and how he lives his life, it's like his music provided so much joy to me as a child, And so to me, it's such an interesting world I live in my heart where it's like on one level there's a lot of things I don't agree with or condone. On the other hand, I'm like, man, it's like it is good music. And it's like,
Hmm.
and it also is so tied into my past. And it's like so I don't know, I just almost become like lost in awe when I think about like the weird overlap of so many of these things, and like trying to make meaning out of it. It's like crazy.
Yeah. But like, Chim Chimney and Tuppence a Bag, those are some of the most beautiful scores like of any movie.
Yeah, and so you know that like whole story too of like Feed the Birds was like Waltz was like his favorite song, and he'd always like have them play it, and he'd like stare out in the window,
Hmm.
probably thinking about his death or whatever, like, yeah.
But
But
there's something weird going on with that song, When You Wish Upon a Star. In the
yeah.
occult world, they use
Oh,
that a lot.
really?
Yeah.
Really? You know,
Hmm.
it's funny. That's one of those ones where, again, like, I didn't really paint enough background of my life here to like people probably just think I'm totally crazy, which is fine. But like, I found because for me, like when I was on my whole inner work thing, is like I was really on this thread of just following where the libido, where the energy took me,
Hmm.
for better for worse, being like a curious cat. And I had to be honest. It's like, man, something like "When You Wish Upon a Star." Like I don't hear lyrics as optimistic coming from anywhere else in our culture. It's like, is this what I'm forced to believe? This like when you wish upon a star crap, And it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, there's almost this like tempting thing in those kind of songs, It's like, oh, just wish upon the star. But what I almost love from like a Christian point of view is like, what the heck's a star gonna do for you?
Hmm.
It's not a person. It's like it's just this like ball of heat in the sky. It's like, don't rely on stars. Like, you kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, though it is a good composition, I confess. All right, what's your favorite land inside the parks?
Fantasyland, just the
Yeah,
castle and the that motif, the
you
aesthetic of
talking Disneyland or World or both, kind of?
well, Disney World has Magic Kingdom, which that is what Disneyland is. So
Right, right,
Disney
right.
World's Epcot, Magic Kingdom, and the Hollywood Disney.
I
So
really
that,
liked New Orleans Square and like the whole like Amazon, like the Adventureland area.
oh
Just kind
yeah.
of, I kind of love that like spot. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But all right, I guess I only have a couple more.
Okay.
Um, okay.
I thought Pirates of the Caribbean franchise was really good.
Yeah, honestly, it's funny. I watched the first three, like a few weeks ago, if I'm being honest. I was like, yo, they held up. Like that
Yeah,
shit's
they're
like,
good. I like that, and I like National Treasure.
yeah, that's a guilty pleasure of mine for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love me some Nick Cage always. Okay, so this one's a more serious question.
Okay.
All right. If you could go back in time and somehow like quote unquote Christmas Carol Walt, show him, you know, this is what your life is going to become. This is what's done. What would you say anything to him? What would you say to the guy? Almost sort of like a cautionary tale or
Hmm.
like, any words of advice for Walt Disney.
What would I say to Walt Disney? Well, first I probably have to like determine where he's coming from and how is he wrapped up in like the bad stuff, because I feel like he's partly stuck in a web of the letter agencies,
Mm-hmm.
and they all want a piece of him and what he's doing and using his imagination against him. So I
Mm,
think, I'd probably just like try and see where he's coming from and how he's hooked in this, and
mm.
how, what's a good way to set him free of these
It's I love that
alphabet
because
agencies.
you're going right for the heart. It's like, okay, before we could do anything about it, like, how are you doing, dude? It's like
Yeah.
yeah. All
Well,
right,
because
last
that's what
question.
the
Okay.
church did for me. Like, it, the approach was so from the ground up, like, do you need to eat? Come to coffee hour. Are you broke? Like, here's a meal, here's a friend, here's super mundane
Mm,
things that I needed because I was in a world of esoteric occult and study and shows and like not doing very good. And I needed real world, like, people to ground me and feed me, and just be my friend and listen to me. So,
yeah. Well, thank God. Yeah. All right, last question.
Okay.
Which Disney princess are you?
I have to be Belle, I guess, because
Good
she's the
choice.
one with
She's
the
so,
library.
yeah, true that. True that.
Um, and yeah, so she's the book nerd, and I'm the one with the giant library, and always have my nose in a book. Uh, have the same look, I guess, as Belle. Um, I call Jay the Beast Man sometimes.
I was gonna try to make a funny joke about Jay, like if you had to like shave him, or if he's like a
Yeah.
weird beast, or yeah, I couldn't come up with anything off
No,
the top of
he's
my
funny. Like,
head.
he'll just walk right up and start eating right out of the pan, or like, like
Oh
Beast
yeah,
Man things. I'm like,
yeah,
you're such
yeah,
a beast.
yeah. That's funny. You know what I love about Beauty and the Beast though?
What?
She falls in love with him before he becomes a man. Like it's so crucial that the feminine, or that our soul, our heart can see the beauty in a person,
Yeah.
without
And
the externals.
it's
I
the
just love
it's her love that transforms him, from the beast to the man,
it.
basically.
Man.
So
I think for me, if I had to be a Disney princess or found one
what?
inside of me, I think Cinderella, man. She's like I love Cinderella. Like I just love that idea. I don't know if it's just an idea, but like kind of knowing it's not your time, and almost like waiting, kind of knowing you got to do your penance, and you can
Mm-hmm.
rely on the helpful, in this case the animals, but like kind of our lower instinctual instincts to help and get us out of it, and then with the little help of our fairy godmother, you know. But I just loved about Cinderella is just how strong she is through everything, and it's like,
I like about Cinderella that humility is the beautiful thing,
mm,
as opposed to her sisters who are rich and spoiled brats, and she's the humble one who has true beauty, because not because of
yeah,
how they drew everything, but because
right,
she
right,
was the
right. No, of
servant,
course.
and that's a Christian, way to be.
Yeah, right. Yeah, even if you want to go that route, like her servitude, the way she served was so amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so she was the meek one and the servant, and that's
and
why
not only
she was
that,
uplifted to be the princess in the end.
I'm all right. I'm totally reaching here, so I haven't thought this one out. So this might be a totally underbaked idea, but I like the idea too that the glass slipper. It's like, I don't want to say she didn't have to do anything to do that, but it's like on some level, the only thing required for her salvation at the end was being in the right time in the right place, because she already had the proper thing, the shoe, to give her
Mm-hmm.
the right standing, pun
Mm-hmm.
intended. It's like
Mm-hmm.
she didn't have to like go on this ultimate quest to like fight the dragon and blah blah blah. It's like she had done so much sewing, not literally. I mean, she sewed a lot of clothes, but SOW, that she reaped so much in full at the end
Mm-hmm.
too. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Well, those are
man,
good
we touched
questions.
on
I
so
like
much
those.
tonight.
Like, I
Yeah, we
mean, I could talk about Disney for hours and hours.
Yeah,
And
honestly, maybe after we stop the recording, we could say bye off mic. But this was so much fun, Jamie. Thank you for having me on.
you're
And
welcome. We didn't even get to, let's see. We talked
oh
about
yeah,
Jepstein. We talked about propaganda. Did you know Walt went to Bohemian Grove?
no, I did
Yeah,
not know
in
that.
1936. We talked about his character.
Really?
Yeah.
So let's see.
Subliminal Messages. That's a crowd favorite.
Uh-huh. Oh
We
yeah, you
all,
know what? I've heard you talk about this one before. And
yeah.
in the one you didn't mention, I was like, I remember this from a VHS version of Aladdin. I
Uh,
don't know if it's on the new cuts, so people can go and check it out. But when he first meets her, and he's like dressed up like Prince Ali, and he comes
mhm.
up on his carpet, and she's there coming out. It's like, who's there? And the cat's coming out. He says, I remember this because I was a kid. I remember it like verbatim, but he was like, down, kitty. And then really quietly, quickly says, take off your clothes.
Oh, yeah.
Where I swear to God, it's so crazy. He's like, down, kitty, just take off your clothes. And you're like, what?
I heard that. Um,
Yeah, the subliminal messaging.
I do want to do The Rescuers. Have you heard of that?
Oh yeah.
And
Oh
The
yeah.
Rescuers Down Under, because it's about child TRAFF.
We should, because Rescuers Down Under was one I loved as a kid that I've not watched as an adult.
Okay.
Because so much of when I did my whole Disney dive the last couple of years was like I had not watched any Disney movies since I was a kid.
Yeah.
So when I watched them all, I was like, whoa, like these things are crazy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So both of
Um,
them are like that, or just the second one?
yeah, they're both about that.
Yeah,
Save
yeah, you're
the,
right,
the
huh?
mice that saved kids from the grabbers. So we didn't
Yeah.
talk about Peeping Mickey. Um, the Beast Corporation. This is all stuff for next time. Disney UFO phenomenon.
So I got that video. I've not watched it, but I have it saved. I know the one you're talking about.
Which
So
one?
the UFO, Disney UFO video, it's like 40 minutes.
Oh yeah. So I did a
Yeah,
whole
well, I
show.
bookmarked it.
If you guys want to watch that, it's the one about extraterrestrials that I did with Kristen, and I have like space buns. So if you want to know all about the Disney UFO connection, it's pretty crazy. And we watched a documentary called Mirage Men, about how a lot of the information that comes down is just straight disinfo, and they pick stupid people to put these UFO ideas out in the world. And they tell you in the documentary, yeah, I work for the government and we pick dumb people to make you believe in aliens. Um,
You know,
so
Jamie, I'm so thankful for you having me here tonight, and it's really inspiring me because like I just realized like we did a lot of like I would just call it kind of poetic rapping about Disney tonight, but it made me think like, man, so much of this stuff could actually be like really distilled and like talked about with like if I were to put more of a generally speaking sober approach to it, you know, like not saying we're not sober now, but like really like honing in. Like there's a lot of stuff here. It's really quite
oh yeah,
fascinating.
it's
Because the part that's
never
interesting
ending.
for me that I confess my interest in Disney is so tied into personal stuff, like all of us, that it's almost like I almost wish I could talk about it with talking about my story, quote unquote, with it. Because I don't because I realize like I perhaps wonder, but that's again, I want to be really clear, like who wants to hear what I want to say or what I have to say? And I'm just some dude, you know, I don't know. But what I mean is like I was so blown away by my own unconscious associations with Disney that
Mhm.
as I have gone through my sort of spiritual life and eventually coming to the church, I realized like, wow, like this whole Disney thing is like a real labyrinth to like get through that like everybody in Western culture has to go through it.
Mm. Mhm.
Really.
Mhm.
Like it's just like I don't know anything else in our culture that I can't think of off the top of my head, but like it's this present force that is real, you
Yeah,
know, and
that's a good
like
way to put it.
and so let's see some of my notes that I have for maybe next time. I think it would probably be fun to like pick certain movies or something and really like walk around them, you know? Okay,
Mhm.
so I had the idea. And who knows? These are kind of, let's see, the Westerns. Oh, Disney. The Western Psyche swan song of the demiurge mythology.
Mm.
As Western man enters into the electric era of demonic idolatry. We could talk about that one another time.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, Disney sacrifices his personhood for persona. We kind of talked a bit about that.
Mhm.
Western religion cannot compete with Hollywood for containing archetypal energies, quote unquote. Kind of talked about that. Um, oh, Mickey Mouse Mercurius. Mickey is this sort of alchemical,
Mercury.
yeah, yeah, in a way, you know, kind of with Sorcerer's Apprentice is like an interesting image of him because Mercurius is like the god of alchemy in
Uh-huh.
many ways. And I see Mickey as a sort of like almost kind of pagan idol of that kind of sense.
Yeah.
But let's see. Just kind of more, oh, Disney is the modernist Prometheus,
Mhm.
the electric alchemist. Talked a little about that.
Do you
Um,
remember the electric parade they used to have? It
oh,
was a big
yeah. Oh,
thing.
yeah.
When you
Like, isn't that
said
so? Right.
electricity, yeah.
Well, and even the parade is such an interesting thing because like I don't know about you, but the only parades I see these days are ones about a lot of letters and colors.
Mm.
And so it's
Mhm.
like interesting that the parade itself is like this quote unquote art form that you could say like only exists in Disneyland and in protests. You know, it's like
Well,
it used to be this promenade, this important thing that
yes.
people gathered around and
The
paid tribute to.
parade comes from the procession of royalty.
Man, think about it now in our culture today,
Yeah.
the quote unquote royalty on parade.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Lord have mercy. Um, Nostalgia with a G, talked a little bit about that. But I think on another level, I wrote, where did I put? Adam and Eve lament paradise and go to Disneyland.
Mm.
So in many ways, our childhood sort of longing for our past, I see a lot of it in that sort of Disney nostalgia, you could say, that's
Yeah.
rampant these days. And I guess just the last things I got a few other notes, but electric mythologies writ large, and the story of all of myths and folk tales, fairy tales, oral tales of culture. It's so fascinating to me that we grew up on TV.
Mm-hmm.
My parents didn't tell me any stories. It's like I get those from a little box that I plug into a wall that if the power ever goes out, I have no source of storytelling, And so it's such an interesting card we've drawn for ourselves as
It's the
modern.
new campfire that we gather
Right.
around. Yeah.
Totally. Absolutely. Monumental shift in tool use by human beings in the 20th century. That's the other thing. We just go through all the inventions of the 20th century and be like, Disney had their hand in every single one of these.
Oh yeah.
Like, and so that's so fascinating to me. And then I guess the last thing I would sort of say is like the sort of the fancy $500 Latin word is the puer aeternus, the eternal child, Peter Pan. And I mean, man, yeah, like we could talk about that too, like at length. So,
What is it called?
puer, Puer,
Puer.
and then eternus. So, like just a Latin version of eternal.
Eternal.
And there may be an A in front of the first E, Aete.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, like the eternal child, man. That's like, and the thing is if you wanted to, or maybe I should, or whatever, if I ever make a channel. But like the puer is such an interesting archetype because this could tie in a lot to like honestly something as far as dating and
Uh-huh.
man boys and kind of the
Well,
whole idea of like yeah, just like yeah, the situation with men today and getting back to like the feminine and the lack of it. Like I think the Peter Pan sort of eternal boy is like such a huge situation that like the flip of that is either we become sort of these simpy guys or we have like the whole men going their own way sort of deal. But all of this is this crazy compensation to, yeah, running away from mama,
well,
and like,
that's
yeah.
Crowley's Crowned and Conquering Child, right?
Say it again.
Do you know who Aleister Crowley is?
I know of him, yeah, but I never really got into his
So
stuff.
he calls right now the Aeon of the Crowned and Conquering Child.
Crown and Conquering Child. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look into
It's like that
that
whole
because that's kind of what
Moonchild
you're
thing,
talking
right?
about.
Is that the Moonchild?
Not exactly.
Okay, okay, okay.
No. But yeah, that's kind of what you're talking about. We are over 3 hours,
Holy shit.
so we're gonna
Oh
have
man. Well,
to.
thank you for your time. It's
Yeah, it's really
wow,
good.
that was a lot of fun, Jamie. I hope we made good entertainment for people out there.
And if you're still hanging on, I think we were interesting enough. I was interested. Um, we are going to be in Austin on February 11th. Jay and I and BG Cumby, the comedian, are going to be doing a live show talking about philosophy, pop culture. I'm going to give a talk called The All Seeing AI, and
Nice.
it's about the rise of sex bots and the history of mind control from the very beginning, the first city in Uruk to now, and everything in between. Jay's going to give a talk about his book, Meta Narratives and the Philosophy and Symbolism. And we're going to have so much fun. Everybody loves it. It's a 5 hour, all day long, like fun thing to do. You can meet new friends. I know a lot of people who have met their future spouse at our events. So,
Glory to God.
yeah, come and get hooked up in a good way. And
Amen.
thank you all for watching. And we will definitely have Paul back in a little bit. Thank you for
Yeah,
coming.
we will hone it down a bit and we won't tangent so much. We'll hone it back in and we'll keep it tight.
Yep. All right.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jamie.
Bye.